Good morning to all of you, and welcome to this conference. Sorry for the delay in beginning of this conference. The regions are known to us because there are two politician names written here. The first one is busy with the BJP National Committee meeting, and he realized last night that he will be preoccupied. The Union Minister is busy with the Parliament. This is a time when the Parliament is on, question answer session. So he says he can come before 9 o'clock. So before 9 o'clock, we cannot start the conference. He has to be present in the Parliament during the Parliament hours. That's why they are not here there. But anyhow, we'll start our program here. We will be recording the sessions, and a part of this session will go to them. They will have their views on that part. Incidentally, Sambit comes from the same place from where I come, and I know him beforehand. And he's a spokesman of the party, so he would like to see the proceedings of the conference and give his viewpoint there. That's what he has promised me. I know Jindal Global University is located a bit far from the city, and sometimes it's difficult for people to come to this place. So I'm really thankful and obliged to all of you for finding time and coming to our campus. Particularly, I'm thankful to all our friends who are here from Queen's University, Belfast, being a part of this exercise. There are a couple of people, those who have shown their interest to share their thoughts, but they will not be present in the conference. They're traveling. Somebody said, I'll give my note. So maybe all those notes which I'll get from people, I'll pass on to Leon so that Leon can get some idea about what people from other areas think, like civil society people, what do they think about. Other economists, those who are going to join us, couple of economists are going to join us, what are their thoughts about that part. And similarly, we have also invited the common man to come and speak here tomorrow. So we'll have a couple of common people who have been impacted by demonetization who will be coming and talking here. Common in the sense they don't hold any office, but they are meaningful people, those who have an opinion there. We understand demonetization from Ravish's point of view because television had shown us that part. We have somebody from television, NDTV, consulting editor of NDTV. So whatever we have seen what has been covered more by the television channels as a common man. So most of the people, those who saw, they have different kind of impressions depending on which channel they are looking at. If they are looking at a certain set of channels who are not in favor of demonetizations, probably they got a different story. But there are certain channels which also said that demonetization has been good. So the impression on the common man of demonetization has been different, mixed. But what is the mechanism behind that is not being much deliberated. What are the implications as far as the digital payments are concerned? What are the implications for the money supply part is concerned? Are we really embracing a new kind of an economic system where technology is going to play a greater role there? So there are structural adjustments and issues which are there, which most of the intellect are not aware about. People, those who are mostly researching in the area, they're drawing comparatives with elsewhere where there has been some kind of demonetization done and whether it has worked there or not worked there. We have started drawing comparatives in that sense. So narratives are mostly comparative in nature there. So we are happy that we have Professor Pulin Naik also here, an economist who is going to throw light on the structural part of that. This idea of doing this conference was there before I joined Jindal Global Business School. There was some conversation which were happening between the faculty members here and Leon. But after I joined, one day I received a mail from Leon talking about how are we going forward and doing this conference. And then we talked about the format by which we'll do this conference, the kind of people those will join for this conference. And Leon is going to take the input from this conference and come back in June, and then probably he'll bring out a policy paper on this. So we'll be releasing a policy document about what are our views out of this conference. I'm sure that there'll be some meaningful conversations. I'll also send the recordings of the conversations in these 2 days to Leon so that he can refer back whenever he has to look into that part. This conference is possible because of cooperation of a team of professors from Queen's University, Belfast, those who are present here from different fields. Like I know Leon is from literature, poetry. Charles Dickens project is what Leon writes there. But he has also interest on that part. And there will be also people from management area and economics and other disciplines, including public finance, those will be present here. On the other side also, we have people, those who are from different areas. We have people from corporate world. We have people from consulting world. We have economists present here. We have academics who are present here. I'm sure there will be definitely a lot of deliberations. And also I have got young students present here and young researchers. They will got some idea about demonetizations as well as some research clues. And I'm sure they will continue working on those areas. And let's see what kind of policy implications demonetization has got. While growing up and reading literature, we understand that when you make decisions, decisions have short-term impacts and long-term impacts. So demonetization will definitely have a short-term impact and long-term impact. While a lot of people suffer during short-term impacts on the street, that's what the popular media has talked about. I'm sure a lot of people have come with propositions that in long-term demonetization is going to be helpful to the society. I think it is more about not demonetization what was a challenge, but remonetization was a challenge. Supply of cash in the absence of 500 and 1,000 rupee notes that we had got there. And the technical glitches which are involved in distributing through ATM machines was one of the implementation related problems. So in my classes, I mostly joke about saying that sometimes you make a bad policy, and if you have got a very good implementer, what happens to that part? It's like a pilot who is flying the plane, but the direction is towards the earth. Sometimes you have a poor implementation, but the blame goes to the policy. If you can't implement, obviously you'll put towards the planned part of it. So that's a challenge between what do you think and what you strategize versus how do you really implement on that part. I'm sure all of you are going to throw light on that part. With this, I'll request Leon to speak about this conference and the objective of this conference. I decided that we should merge the inaugural as well as the technical panel together. That's why we had the cup of tea before we started this session, so that there can be storm on cup of tea. Leon, please.
Thank you. Professor Panda, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. On behalf of my colleagues who are here and the wider body of staff at Queen's University, thank you for inviting us to your institution. I first visited Jindal University last November as part of a delegation that sought to forge closer links between our two institutions. And in our discussions with the Vice-Chancellor, we noted that our aspiration was to cooperate on joint ventures extended well beyond staff or student mobility, to encompass serious collaboration on research, because we believed this was the best means of ensuring that the work we do together has implications well beyond Sonipat and Belfast. I'm very pleased to say that this conference on demonetisation and the emerging challenges is the first step down the road towards producing effective research that addresses the issues that matter to wider society, and placing our two universities at the very centre of intellectual and practical endeavour will, in this case, affect how our stakeholders, including government, business, finance, and indeed the wider society, view this recent change in the financial circumstances and the dealings of 1.3 billion people in the world's largest democracy. Probes much more deeply than assessing what happened on the 8th of November 2016. Our speaker list today features our 5 specialists from Queen's, myself, Samuel Bean, Neil Jarvin, Federico Lucapazzini, and Rajneesh Kumar. We're here as specialists, but also as instigators to get proceedings underway and to provide a structure for discussion. We are, however, aware that there are many others here who have deep knowledge and experience in the 5 areas of exploration. We welcome your input, and we trust that we can learn from each other to our mutual benefit. I trust that our discussions over these 2 days will probe deeply, challenge robustly, examine sensitively, and conclude productively. Our aim is to produce a report which we will present to the governments of India and the United Kingdom, And in it, we will include some recommendations about how the various stakeholders can address the central issues arising from November's decision in an effort to contribute practically to improving the lives of ordinary citizens of this great country. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. Now we'll move to the technical session, and I hand it over to Vizil.
Thank you, sir. Thanks. We thank our dear Dean and our guest of the day, Mr. Leon from Queen's University, Belfast, for giving us an intro into what we are actually going to look forward to for the next 2 days. And now we are moving on to the first panel on the topic, the premise of e-money and digital payments. I call upon the chair for the session will be Federico Lupo Pasni, lecturer, International Business and Finance Law, Queen's University, Belfast, UK. And the moderator for the session will be our vice dean, Professor K.K. Pandey.
I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists, starting out with Mr. Vijay Sardaris, Advisory Committee in SEBI, Member Board of Governing Director, Senior, SIM Foundation. He did his PGDM from IMA and has immense experience in agribusiness.
We welcome you, sir, for the session. Our next panelist is Dr. Pulin B. Nayak, Professor of Economics at Delhi School of Economics. He has got his PhD from University of Rochester. His areas of interest are public economics and economic theory. He was also the former director of DSE. Welcome you, sir.
Then we have Mr. Sanjay Phadke, Consultant, Fintech and Advisor, Turnaround. He did his Masters in Management Studies Finance from Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies and Management Leadership Program from the Wharton School, US. He served as executive of JP Morgan, senior director at IBFC, and executive VP of Edelweiss Financial Services. We welcome you.
So, good morning everybody. It's a pleasure being back in India. I used to come here quite often a few years ago. So when Leon asked me to join the panel, the first thing that I suggested is why don't we have a panel on digital finance and e-payments? And the reason why I asked that is not only because I teach a course in my university on digital financial services, and I work on that, but because I think that, as Henry Ford used to say, the goal is to make of every problem an opportunity. And I think that when it comes to demonetization, the real opportunity is to enable India to move up into the new version, Finance 2.0, and which is going to bring a lot of benefit for the economy. Now, I want to start with a sentence that I found in the committee to review the framework on digital payments. There was a paper that was issued in December, and the very first sentence of this 200-long pages document was, digital payments is to finance what the invention of wheel was to transport. And this is very, very true. Digital payment is, the new version of finance, and this is what is going to bring the financial sector into the new economy. India has problems right now when it comes to finance and financial inclusion. I found here a few data. India's cash to GDP ratio is among the highest in the world. India is very, very reliant on cash. 78% of all consumer payments are affected by cash. While actually only 53% of India population has access to financial services. So you have essentially 47% of the population which is unbanked. Now, a society which is reliant on cash is a society that is going to have serious problems in many ways. Number one, cash is expensive. Cash is expensive because cash has to be printed, cash has to be distributed. Consumers, when they take cash, they need to go to the ATM. So you need to have an entire ATM network and the entire banking network that relies on the use of cash. Cash also has a problem of security. You don't know if you're going to lose it. You need to take care of the cash. Cash, can be stolen, can be is perishable actually. So sometimes you have to print new notes. So cash is expensive. So according to a few data, actually, the cost of cash for the Indian economy is around 1.7 of India GDP. I mean, this is a lot. If you think that by giving up the use of cash, you could get 1.7 GDP more, this is quite a lot of money, right? On top of it, cash, we will discuss in the section probably tomorrow, the use of cash brings other kind of problems. Brings problem of frauds, money laundering, crime. Cash is very difficult to trace. So essentially, you have one part of the society that is totally unseen by the regulator, right? And this brings a lot of problems. Now, when Prime Minister Modi had his address to the nation in November, said, well, we should embrace technology and use this decision, this move towards the demonetization in order to enhance the use of digital finance. And so the scope of this panel is to actually figure out what are the problems that we're going to have to move from a cash society into a cashless and finance 2.0 or payment 2.0 society in the future. The goal of the government is to include 90% of the unbanked section of the society into the banking sector. And digital payment and in general, digital finance can do that. So why digital finance is so important? I've been working in many parts of the world on digital finance for various governments. And you can see from the data that actually digital finance can actually bring more than other ways of delivering financial services unbanked persons into the banked economy. So what are the benefits of digital finance? First of all, a consumer that is able to use his mobile phone, for instance, or a computer to transfer money is going to be a consumer that is going at one point to tap into the more sophisticated financial services. So banks are very sophisticated entities, and they offer a lot of services. Not all the services that a bank offer are used by everybody. So you have on one point payment services, which are usually offered by bank historically, which are used by 100% of the society. Whereas you have, let's say, wealth management, which is going to be used by 2% of the society. In between, you have like saving services, deposits. Saving and deposit are particularly important for an economy because allow money to flow from those who have it to those who do not have it. So they offer credit opportunities. Now, if you use digital finance, if you move to a system which is reliant on digital payments, you're going to move to a system that actually is going to incentivize those who do not have a bank account to have a bank account and at one point to save, and this money that they're going to save are going to then be distributed to businesses who need it. Also, the use of digital finance can reduce the risk of frauds and loan sharking. Data prove that unbanked individuals are more prone to are more susceptible of being more susceptible to frauds and to loan sharking because they cannot go to a bank. They don't have any credit history. Digital finance and digital payments, so the use of smartphone or even simple Nokia mobile phone, allow companies to trace the data that or the usage of these phones, and essentially they create new ways of recording the behavioral patterns of these persons. So you don't need to have any more a credit history in order to get a loan, but you could simply have the pattern of the usage of your phone, We can see how you're going to spend your money, who is in your network. There are a lot of actually softwares that have been developed around the world that essentially allow companies and banks to use data, mobile phone data, in order to have a better and clear picture of one person and his credit history. So also digital finance reduce the risk of defaults and in essence, remove all the problems that cash has. Now, what are the challenges for the government and for the Indian economy in moving to payment 2.0 society? So number one, infrastructure modernization. Mobile finance and digital finance is in between finance and technology, and there is heavily reliant on a telecom network. In order for mobile banking and digital finance to work for everybody, for the poor especially, you need to have a telecom network that reaches all over India. Without that, simply you won't have it. Another problem is a problem of policy and is a question of restrictive practices of banks. So right now banks are helping each other, let's put it like this, in order to prevent telecom network operators to enter into the payment system. All over the world, in many countries at least, digital payment providers are telecom. The clearest example, which is usually used, is M-Pesa, a big Kenyan operator, which were the very first telecom operator to operate payment system through mobile phones. Telecom has, it's very important to have telecom operators to enter into the mobile banking system because telecom operator can use the network that bank do not have. If you live in a village and it takes 2 days to go to the next branch, a telecom network essentially allows you to move money from your house to a person which is 800 miles far from you in 1 second without the need to go to a bank. So it's important that the government incentivize banks, actually disincentivize banks and prohibit banks from colluding in their attempt to restrict the entry of telecom operator into the payment market. Also, it's important for this reason, and because of the specificity of mobile payment, that payment systems are regulated independently from the central bank. Right now, all over the world, payment is under the central bank. However, if we want to move to a payment 2.0 system in which mobile banking and digital payment are going to coexist with cash, you need to have a regulator that specifically targets the needs of digital payments. Central banks are not good in doing that. Finally, it's important that the government start his work to incentivize the use of digital finance. All over the world, if you leave innovation to consumers, you might have a lot of risk because, especially when it comes to payment, individuals tend not to trust mobile payment because they are used to see money only as cash. And in order to incentivize individuals, firms, businesses to use digital finance, you need to have a government that incentivizes this use. So what the government could do, first, the government should start to adopt digital payments itself. When it's paying persons, it can start paying persons through their mobile banking account. And when I was working, for instance, I did a work for the Asian Development Bank in a country in the Pacific, and the very first thing that we asked to do to the central bank was essentially to pay all its employees and the government through mobile banking. And by doing so, you essentially force consumers to use mobile banking facilities. Second, the government should withdraw the charges which are now levied by the departments on digital payments, and the government should start bearing the cost of these transactions. The government should mandate all the departments and agencies to provide options to consumers to pay digitally. So give them another option, not only cash. Incentivize consumer to make payments, including payments for fines, to the government electronically by giving a discount or a cashback. These are very, very simple, very simple decisions to take, and are going to impact very much on the decision of consumers, individuals, and firms to start using mobile banking. Without the intervention of the government, it's going to be very difficult for digital payments to take off in India, because persons in general do not trust digital finance. However, it's necessary for all sorts of reasons that I explained before that we're going to move into Finance 2.0 also for India. And so I conclude here with this my introductory speech, and I would like to hear the views of the other persons in the panel.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Federico, for highlighting and then talking about the initials about the premises of e-money and digital payment here in India. It was actually surprising for all of us. Even I got this news from my bank manager. He's a very good friend of mine. He called me up in the evening. He said, Dr. Pandey, do you know what happened? I said, no, sir, I have not seen the television or news. He says, oh, you are not exposed towards the news I am going to give you. He told me that 86% of Indian currency is now nullified. And that decision was given 8th of November. So it is actually, a setback sometime when you know that 85%, almost, data said 86% of Indian currency was nullified. As already mentioned, that we are an emerging economy. Our economy is majorly based on cash-based economy. Almost 78 to 80% we are doing transition cash. So it was actually a setback. But actually it was setback. Or it was a way for establishing something, some new venture, some new initiatives was taking place. So this has not happened first time in India. It was happened already in 1946 when 1,000 rupees and 10,000 rupees were cancelled. It was again happened in 1978 when 1,000 and 5,000 and 10,000 rupees was demonetized. But this time the situation is different. This time the scale was different. This was the impact of the different. Whether we were ready for the infrastructure challenges, the infrastructure. Yes, we have a lot of, like I can name some of them: Paytm, PayUmoney, MobiKwik, etc., State Bank, Buddy, Citi, Masterpass, ICICI Pocket, SDFC Chiller, Lime, or Top Digital Wallet. And a research says that research is by Tech SCI, which is titled India Mobile Wallet Market Opportunities for Forecast 2020. It says that what this digital wallet in India market, it is going to be projected to 6.6 billion by 2020. The question is that whether it is going to be without digital infrastructure, without proper resource facilities, without proper policies. So there's issues of discussion. There are several views on the same point which actually needs to address here. So we have prominent speakers here. I'll request one by one my panelists to highlight on the issues. We can discuss 5 to 10 minutes first of all in first round, that what you think from your perspective, from your point of view, what are the premises of e-money and digital payment. So I'll start requesting from Professor Nayak, and then Sanjay ji, then Vijay ji, then Ravesh, and then Punia ji. After 10-minute discussion, what we'll try to take out some key concise point, and then we'll try to open this platform for discussion, because what I find, a lot of my students, they are here and they would like to explore more from practical aspects. They are very lucky because we have now in front of, we have professors, we have the person, those who are working in the real time, they are real economists actually. They can see the real aspects of economics. So what we can do, we'll try to discuss the challenges, the opportunities, whether you are ready or not. If not ready, what sort of readiness is required, what sort of improvement is required, and how come it is going to affect our economies. We are going to discuss all aspects of digitalization and e-money here.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Thank you also for inviting me to this conference. I'll try to... Now, but before giving my sort of assessment of the entire problem, let me briefly sort of touch upon the circumstances under which demonetization was brought about. On 8th November 2016, Prime Minister comes on the television set, addresses the country, and gives this news that 500 rupee and 1000 rupee notes are to be demonetized. Now, the explicit purposes for which this act was done was that there was a feeling in his mind and that of his government that there was a lot of black money or black wealth. This was not properly sort of elaborated upon, and often in the literature, anybody who reads about black income, black money, there's a lot of confusion about what exactly we mean by this. Prime Minister used the term Kala Dhan, which he has subsequently used also. The idea was that if you demonetize currency notes of 1,500 rupee, then you are doing away with black wealth or Kala Dhan. That is the translation. But black income is a different concept. Conceptually, black income is a flow notion, and black wealth is a stock notion, and one can go from one to the other, but they're not one and the same thing. Confiscating and doing away with 500 rupee and 1000 rupees notes, and in this case 86% of the currency in circulation was demonetized. The presumption that this will bring black activity or black income to be drawn down to minuscule levels or zero or to a very small level is too optimistic a presumption. Black income can still be generated even after you have confiscated 500 rupee, 1000 rupee notes. So there is a conceptual issue of stock and flow. That is one particular issue. Prime Minister also talked about terrorism and some of the other issues and so forth. But essentially the idea was to do away with corruption and do away with the black activity and Kala Dhan. Now, from all accounts, it appears that this is a decision on which the Finance Ministry was not in the know of. They had not been consulted. Certainly not the Chief Economic Advisor was in the know of it. Possibly even the Finance Minister was not consulted. And in later discussions, the Finance Minister has not contradicted this notion. So the Prime Minister took this decision as an issue on his own. Now let's look at the enormity of the issue. The Prime Minister is a great politician. He has a great sense of politics, events and so forth. But economics, we don't know, and certainly that is my point that I'm trying to talk about. 86% demonetization is based on the presumption that the 500 rupee, 1000 rupee notes are principally notes taken care of by the richer sections of the population, people who indulge in corruption and so forth. If you demonetize, that activity will be gone. Now, the actual reality was one where in recent times, and certainly in the last 5-10 years or so, 500 rupee notes were very much in use, not only necessarily by the top income levels, but by the middle income or even the poorer sections of the population. You would see at low levels, 100 rupee and 500 rupee notes were very much in use, and common people would be doing their savings very much in terms of 100 rupee notes or 500 rupee notes. So the idea that it would only hit the richer sections was incorrect, certainly not. Let me contrast this with post-1947, post-independence. There's been only one instance of demonetization in India, and that was in 1978. The one prior to 1947, point of independence, 15th August 47, was in 46. That was when the country was still under the yoke of British imperialism. So let's look at the post-independence situation. if time permits, I can also talk about 46. There was some mention of that, but I'm going to disregard that. I'm only looking at just for the sake of brevity in terms of presentation, so and saving on time. Look at the only other demonetization experience that we had in 1970. Let me give you the facts. Morarji Bhai Desai was the Prime Minister of the country. He was very keen to have a demonetization at that particular point. The Finance Minister was H.M. Patel. He was ambivalent. He was on the side of saying no, but he would go along with Morarji Bhai, his senior in politics. The governor of the Reserve Bank of India then was a gentleman by the name I.G. Patel, a person of formidable economic prowess, He had personally been known to John Maynard Keynes in Cambridge. He was a student in Cambridge. He was an A student. He got the Adam Smith Prize there, etc. But after doing brilliantly in Cambridge, he was personally known to Pigou, the great economist of Cambridge. But after being a great student and doing fantastically well in his studies, he decided to become a bureaucrat. So his path went in a different direction. He joined the IMF, then came back to India, etc. But 1978, he's the Reserve Bank of India governor. He has explicitly stated that this is an idea that we should never have gone in for. And he said this very explicitly and openly to the Prime Minister himself, none less than the Prime Minister. He said it very clearly to Morarji Bhai. And he says that in his autobiography, I.G. Patel writes, when he said this in a very explicit way, H.M. Patel, the finance minister, he just gave a smile. He was taking no position this way or that. Morarji Bhai wanted the demonetization to be gone through. Country did go through it. And currency notes of 1,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees and 10,000 rupee notes were in fact demonetized. But think of those individuals, there are many young people who will not remember the 78 event. But even the older people actually will not remember the 78 demonetization in India, actually, because few of us had seen the 5,000 rupee or 10,000 rupee notes. It was not to be seen by anyone anywhere. Even 1,000 rupee notes were not in regular use. I'm talking of 78, mind you. The total amount of currency that was demonetized then, believe it or not, was an amount which is 1.78% of the total currency. Contrast this with 86% plus. Okay? Demonetization happened because Morarji Bhai Desai was a very stubborn politician. We all know it. We all know about various other aspects of his characteristics. He was a great politician, no doubt. He had his personal stamp on the quality of politics. He wanted demonetization, so he brought this about. But it hardly had any impact on the economy. 1.78% of the total currency was demonetized. Life went on almost as usual. Come to 8th November 2016, 86% is demonetized. It had a crippling effect on the economy. And people will remember what happened in the country. Huge long queues lasting 15 days, 1 month, 1.5 months. Of course, today the situation is different. I agree. India is a capable economy, big economy, one of the very fast growing economies. So things are totally different. But why should a country have had to go through this deep, disturbing structural problem when everything seemed to be going well? India was the fastest growing economy in 2015-16. We know that. 7.6%. We even beat China to it. All the European countries were in the range of 2.5, 3.5 to 4%. Brazil and Russia recorded negative growth. 2015-16 I'm talking. India becomes the fastest growing major economy of the world. Okay? In that situation, you bring in demonetization. Of course, the jury is still out. CSO says that the growth rate for this year is around 7.1%, but the precise period of the demonetization, the effect of it, is still to be factored in, and I'm pretty sure after it is all factored in, we are definitely going to dip below 7.1%. So this is a major difficulty we have brought upon ourselves, and this was taken on by a Prime Minister who perhaps was not properly given the information, or he didn't have it clear in his mind that he is going to demonetize 86% of the currency, and hence the major difficulty that we've had to go through. Now, my time I'm sure is pretty much gone, but I'll make some comments on, you see, the notion of demonetization, trying to do away with the black economy soon was given up, because the Prime Minister soon realized, he's a very intelligent person, he realized that by this act, he will not be able to really draw down black activity in this country. And when people engage in black activity, they don't keep money in cash. At least in India, they keep it in gold, real estate, and such others. Cash is the last sort of manner in which they would want to sort of store their wealth. Now the question then turned towards the idea of this cashless economy. Prime Minister's early notion of demonetization to do away with Kala Dhan, that mode of talk slowly changed towards a cashless economy. But cashless in a country where, as you correctly have mentioned, some 47%, or almost nearly half the population is unbanked. You have a situation where we are talking of an per capita income level of India is barely 17 or 1800 US, if you are doing a comparative kind of picture. 17 or 1800 US dollars per person per annum. Contrast this with the US, about 55,000. Most of the European countries, 45,000 or thereabouts. We are at a very, very low level. But not just that. Within this, there's a highly skewed distribution of income. And if the income distribution is highly unequal and the inequality has been growing in the last 25 years after the reforms have been set in 1991. What does that mean? That means that even though the average is about 1800 US dollars, there are many who are well below that, because there is some Mr. Ambani who is taking the huge amount of income, and a couple of others, who are in the billionaires list. India also has a large number of billionaires. So each such billionaire is going to push down a large number of people in the bottom rungs. What does that leave us with? Well, it leaves us with some 22, 23, or say about a quarter of the population absolutely below the poverty line. Where is the question of these individuals going cashless? They are barely at a level where 30, 40 rupees for a rickshaw puller is going to be enough for his daily rice and wheat and dal. Where is the question of having a Paytm thing and he'll have to put in $1,000 to get that Paytm instrument or whatever? That's the last thing that will be there in his mind. So what I'm trying to say is that cash has got to be there, at least in the Indian economy, for a long, long time to come. Let me tell you about some of the numbers. India's currency as a percentage of GDP is about 12. This is a very recent book written by Ram Reddy of EPW. Just come out last month. It's been reviewed in several places. India's currency as a percentage of GDP, 12.25%. Well, Hong Kong, 15.5%. Japan, 20.66%. Much higher per capita. Much higher. Even Switzerland, I find, is almost 12%. So the idea that we can do away with cash. Of course, everything is possible. You say that cash has a cost. Yes. But the other systems also have a cost. And they have risks as well. There's a problem of cyber crime of a very significant proportion. We have to factor that in as well. So if you do a proper cost-benefit analysis of cash and the other modes, I'm not very sure that cash will be more expensive vis-a-vis the other. The other means that you have to have computers or mobile phones and such things with the entire population. And they have to be well educated and sort of literate enough to make use of that. And I'm not very sure that India is ready to move in so quickly. But what I would say, I don't want to trash this idea of digitalization and cashless economy. There's a section. Everything true about India, the opposite is also true. This was a statement of John Maynard Keynes. So, there's a bottom 20, 30 or 40% of the population. They have to have cash. They need that 20, 30, 40, 50 rupees. Sometimes they only make 60 bucks a day. That's all that they get. Now they're not going to get that money in Paytm. They want 10 rupee notes so that they can go and buy some rice and dal. That's what, that cash is necessary, needed for them. But there is a section of the economy at the top level in Bombay, Delhi, Gurgaon and so forth. They are the billionaires. They can do the sort of digital transactions. So everything is possible. But for the bottom 40-50% of the population, this is my humble opinion, I think the Prime Minister is grossly wrong in thinking that we should be moving full scale into a cashless and digitalized economy. I think the bottom 50% needs a lot more time. They have to have cash for the short and medium term. So that's all I have to say.
I think that we are lucky that we have Professor Nayak type of person here. They can actually the point which he highlighted, the readiness, the system and the process, that is actually one point of discussion which we'll discuss later on. We are not going to leave this topic here. We'll discuss that whether we are ready, whether our infrastructure is ready. But before discussing it to open house, would like to request our next guest, Sanjay ji, if you can highlight from your perspective, your point of view, then we can proceed further. Please, sir.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Professor Pandey, and thank you for the other initial introductions before. I'm going to deal with some of the technology aspects of this whole thing, I think, which is the topic that I guess is the first topic. So, but before I come to that, let me just briefly recount my experience of the famous 8th November speech. We were actually on road from Bombay to Pune. That's where I now live after spending 2 decades in Bombay, covering different areas of banking and finance, and now dealing with technology in Pune. We got to know at about 6 o'clock that there is a speech at 6:30. This is one of the many WhatsApp groups that each of us is part of. So one of the markets group, which is very active, talked about there is a speech at 6:30. We were on the road. We didn't have any, obviously, phone connection, but we had our phones with us. We had our mobile phones with us, and we had a Geo device. Okay, now the Geo device was capable of actually beaming that entire speech on, with zero distortion. So while we were on the road, we heard the whole speech. We figured out that there is going to be a run on the bank soon. We got down at the next stop. We actually withdrew some cash as well, as we saw that as soon as we got there, several other people got there, and soon the small ATM was out of stock. Obviously, it was not prepared for that. The reason I'm recounting this is to just show the scale of change in technology that we have come about in last decade or two. I think it's all very recent, at least as far as India is concerned, but it's really catching very fast. So in many ways, I think India always jumps a step or two. It has been seen whether it's the mobile itself rather than fixed line penetration, many other areas. And I think, to my mind, the demonetisation and the subsequent steps of that, GST, which is going to come now, is the next step, and so on, would pretty much rewrite the entire architecture of finance as we know that. And as Frederico mentioned, version 2, it does look like this version 2 would be pretty much top of the line when one compares with the international architecture today. So a brief mention of what were the reasons of the demonetization, while not trying to dispute the notion of the esteemed Professor Nayak. I think the the fact is that only 2% of Indians pay income tax, right? And for a country of this size, if it has to develop, you obviously need a lot more people to pay tax, and a lot of transactions are not getting reported. That's the reason why the number of taxpayers is so far low. And the part about 86% of cash in high denomination notes that sort of went out also probably needs to be seen in conjunction with what that proportion was maybe 10 years back. So again, I'm not an economist, but some of the data that I've heard about did talk about that 86% was probably close to 15% in 2006 or 7, so about 10 years back. So what that shows is that there has been a great increase in the number of high denomination notes, which probably is also a factor represented by the increase in prosperity. But there's also some research which talks about the speed with which many of those high denomination notes has not been coming back into the banking system. And again, can't be absolutely sure, but some of the research that I heard about was about of the 500 rupee notes, 1/3 never came back into the system, and of the 1,000 rupee notes, 2/3 never came back into the system. And this was referring to some internal research that RBI had done, apparently. But anyway, I want to stick to the technology aspects of this, which is really the end result of this, if it is really seen in the context that we continue to see. So you probably have to see this as not a one step, but a series of steps that have been ongoing. The first, and there's one common theme behind all this, that is the whole India stack, which is the team of very, very bright and talented people headed by Nandan Nilekani, who also is now known as, apart from his Infosys stint, the real founder of Aadhaar, the identity scheme that India brought about a few years back. So there was Aadhaar, then there was UPI, which is the de facto, hopefully soon to be standard of payments. And subsequent to that is what we saw, demonetisation. We'll also see GST, which will effectively record all transactions, whether small or large. And we've already seen BHIM, which is the interoperable app. And I'll talk about the interoperability, which is one of the key aspects of this whole digital transition a bit as well. So if you look at the new architecture of cash and payments in India, or rather payments and finance in India, you basically see that the system is slowly going from a bank-led system to a mobile-led system. So as is part of many other industries that are slowly undergoing transformation. So what is really important is to figure out who all are really capable of using the mobile. And again, as Dr. Naik very rightly mentioned, there are a lot of people who actually don't have mobile and who may not have a smartphone. So these statistics again shows that 1/3 of the people have smartphones in India. Those are also likely to be the people who also have credit cards and debit cards. The next 1/3 have a feature phone, which does not have many of the functionalities of that we are used to, certainly I guess within this room. And the next 1/3 actually doesn't have access to phone either. So what that means is that this architecture has to really reach out to not just the first part, which is obvious, which will I think happen, whether it happens through the Paytms of the world, the wallets of the world, or the BHIM app of the government, which reduces the overall transaction cost quite substantially, because all said and done, the private wallets as well as the private debit cards and other electronic transaction systems have a large cost, as much as 2% in many of the card solutions as the merchant discount rates. So obviously that's not really meaningful to go from 1.7% cost of cash to a 2% cost of payments. So obviously that cost needs to come down. But going towards the second leg or second third of the overall population, which just has access to a feature phone, what is really required is the next innovation, which is already started getting talked about and which is already introduced, which is about the USSD 2.0 payments, which is the next leg of UPI. which essentially enables even a non-smartphone user to transact on his phone. And here is an area which obviously requires a lot more clarity, a lot more push, regulatory push, to be able to ensure that the banks, which are the current sort of have a pretty much hegemonic position in the world of finance, do not stifle innovation, whether it comes by way of telecom companies or pretty much any other sort of intermediaries that we'll see slowly. Because we now see that every mobile is effectively a POS terminal, and it's capable of being effectively seen as a bank branch. The next one-third really need services which are purely based on something which is not phone linked, and that is also under preparation or under release, which is the AEPS, which is the Aadhaar enabled payment system, which essentially just works on the basis of biometric identification and a linked bank account. There is no need of a phone in that. Now again, this is also underway. Obviously it needs to get a lot more popularized. So if all this happens, then I think the cost of capital, which for a last leg in the economy can be as high as 70, 80, 100%, it actually gets counted as per month or per day rather than per year as we are used to, can come down pretty significantly. What are the areas of caution or areas of further work? I'll probably just note two at this stage. One is obviously the issue of data security. I think we clearly are getting into a lot more interlinked world. A lot of data that was earlier private or only with banks, which was not really private, but it was with banks, is now getting thrown open into a much wider ecosystem. There are issues with that, especially when it comes to people who are not sophisticated and may not have the best security solutions for that. So again, government has to do a lot of work in ensuring that while on one hand we push the entire Finance 2.0, it doesn't open up significant risk on data theft, cyber security. There are some measures which are coming out by way of digital lockers and so on. But as we know in technology, no system is 100% free from hacking. So it's really, one has to really think through a lot harder on these issues, especially when it's a low strata of the society whose livelihood will over a period of time depend upon that. The other area is, like I mentioned, banks and non-banks, and I think eventually, the whole digital finance also calls for a change in the or points towards a change in the architecture of the financial system, which is pretty much focused on banks at this stage, and whether it's things like peer-to-peer lending, which takes care of the credit aspects, or payments which are already out of the banking system. A lot of areas are slowly branching out of the banking system, and one needs to see how banks redefine themselves. So I'll just end with a small couplet on a discussion that we had in 2014, around the time that the current administration came about, and that's about we were basically debating within our markets groups as to what is going to be the hallmark of a great leader, and obviously somebody who has taken a risk as large as this shows their risk-taking capacity. But I think what is really important and really veering away a little bit from technology is what was seen was, and again, not a political economist or scientist, but somebody who can actually make vast number of people take actions that are not easy, that are sort of painful, but good for the greater good, is really the mark of a great leader. Somebody who willingly gets people to sacrifice, and I think 40 crore people standing in lines for 1 month, 2 months was nothing short of a big sacrifice. So I just hope that the greater good which was implied is what we see coming out of this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Here it is actually important that whether we are ready for this system, readiness, along with the readiness, security has its own importance. Even I used to share the story along with my students sometime in the class, that how security is important. Even we are not able to understand that what is the data and how much the security labels are required for this data. And when this data is related to the payment process, then how much the security required. Even if somebody asks you that what is the electricity bill and how many units you consume within a month, you never hesitate to share this data along with them. But one can easily, as a data scientist I can tell you, one can easily find out the pattern in the data of electricity consumption over the year, and then can estimate that how many members are there inside the family, and then this information is a different information which can be utilized another way. This demonetization was not only negative for some person, it was very positive for some person, those who are earning even no rupees. So they opened their account, there was 0 rupee in the balance of account. Just after demonetization night, within the night they become crorepati. It was surprising. So yes, there are positive and negative aspects of shades of this demonetization. It has impacted a lot. I'll say there is a positive point and negative point. Readiness, security, safety, challenges, implementation. So would like to invite Sadhana ji, who is actually expert in the area of economics. I used to hear him every time when he gives speech. I follow him on the TV, because the discussion he gave, he never inclined towards any specific side. So his ideas are unbiased. As a statistician, I'll say unbiased. So he's trying to trace down the economic points and how come this is going to affect the economy ourselves. So Sadhana ji, request you to highlight the issue.
Good morning to all of you. 8th November, around 8:20. I was preparing for my exam. And my wife, she is a lawyer, and she was preparing for her case. And suddenly mobile started getting all these tweets. One came, second came, and then there was a flow of tweets. And she was getting irritated. How many girlfriends you have? Tell them not to disturb at this time. And yeah, I'm studying, I'm not talking to anyone. Let me see what is there. And I saw there was a series of tweets from PMO. And it says, demonetization of 500 and 1,000. I was working on laptop, I immediately switched on to webcasting of government and PM speech was live. I was listening and suddenly I started getting calls from TV studios. Sir, we need your reaction. And I was just there, and I was watching this speech, and on the other side I was talking to the phone. And my statement was, I think this is a surgical strike on black money. And that became news headline. I was the first person on Indian TV channels reacted on demonetization. And by that time, I had 5 OB vans in front of my house in the night, and for the first time my neighbors knew that I also had some relation with TV. Let me put the full perspective again. What you are discussing here is immaterial to me. This is not the agenda of the government. Now, when people ask me, what do you think about demonetization and digital payment? I say it is like when you are busy in something more important and your kids are troubling you, what do? You hand over them a toy, you get yourself engaged in something, don't disturb me. And then 2 kids in the house, they start fighting which toy is good and which toy is bad, and why this is blue and why this is green, and I need white and I need green and all that. Let me tell you, friends, you have to look the whole demonetization in a very different perspective, and which we are not discussing and none of the intellectuals are discussing. Because the information on which this agenda was created is not in public domain, except the fact of life. You are looking this from an economic point of view. Mr. Modi is not an economist, he is a politician. When he says he has not consulted the economists, obviously he is right. There was no need to consult economists on this agenda. This is not an economic agenda. And what you are discussing is actually a toy like kids, and how many of you have experience of working closely with politicians? I have 10 years plus experience of working one-to-one like bedroom discussions with politicians. Please appreciate, politicians think beyond what you can even anticipate. And that's why they can rule the country and they can give the direction. And we keep fighting on nuances, whether this is spelling was right or not. Fact of the matter is, what is the agenda behind? And if you really want to see, was this a surprise? Why it has happened? Read 3 months before and 3 months after that 8th November and then draw a complete picture. You will come to know what you are discussing is actually a reverse order. In fact, the first session on digitization itself is wrong. It should be genesis of demonetization. Why it happened? What is the story behind it? You are coming to the last insignificant conclusion which is immaterial to anyone. And we are trying to justify it is very important. That's the fact. Before demonetization, we had a surgical strike in Pakistan. The whole country was talking about security threats. And in that whole game, we missed out an RBI notification to bank. Please load your banks with a small denomination, ATMs. Have you ever seen? There's a news headline. Suddenly, everybody ignored. Please stuff your banking ATM system with a small denomination notes. Nobody looked at it. Media thought it's another regular circular of RBI. Day before demonetization, Honorable Prime Minister had a meeting with 3 chiefs of our defense forces in his office. And for the first time it was publicized in newspapers. The PM is having meeting with 3 chiefs together. Please understand, politicians are smarter than us. They know how to communicate and change public opinion. We are not. That's why we are not able to rule the country. It's very important for us. What was the purpose? What was the message? And then we all are talking about post-mortem. How the RBI decision took place? Whether RBI meeting was in Delhi or Bombay, on which they signed this document, it was in Delhi for the first time. Why? Where all the RBI governors were staying in Delhi, they never stayed in the same hotel, they all were in different hotels. This will not come in public. Please understand. It's a planned activity. It's not by default. At what time RBI meeting happened? Not in office hours. After office hours. Who's discussing this? We are interested in where there is an economic sense. No, this is not economic. This is national policy and there is a logic behind it. How you ignore, see, it's very important. Camouflaging of the communication is extremely important when you have a bigger agenda in mind. I cannot go and talk to media and press what I am saying and what I am thinking. Sorry. It's not the first time. I can tell you n number of incidences with n number of politicians. What was the intention and what was the statement in the press has no correlation. Because this is the way Indian media also does not think through. What is the competency technically of reporters, those who are sitting with the mic and giving the reporting? Fresh graduates from college with no reading habit, no analysis, no historical fact. And one of my very senior journalists, was editor in one of the channels, he says, he used to call it intellectual terrorism. You just give a mic to a fresher guy, go and get the bite. The person who has no experience of politics and economy says, minister is saying this, I think this is not right. What is his own competence? So my point is, this is classically exploited by the political system of India to achieve the destination which they got. And we are still confused in our own words. That is, let me tell you, and there are many more things which I will not say, because there are a lot of other information which we don't have. Are you saying the only source of communication to Prime Minister is the media or the bureaucracy? Don't we have intelligence agencies, those who brief him on daily basis? And what all intelligence agencies provide is not a public domain. For that you have to have a different access. And I can tell you that you may be thinking is economic activity or economic action. For me, it was a political action. And I say it was failure or success. I think it was a success. And you have seen the results of elections in last assembly elections. So he achieved the objective, what he has done. Now, you cannot discuss and write in press. You cannot write a book on it because he will not. So who will write? Those who have to spend time, they are paid for. They will do it. But his agenda is done. Now, what we are discussing the byproducts and offshoots, and everybody is taking out the busy in there. And we are doing the same thing. Now, the issue comes up is how to justify now. Objective is done. Results achieved. But you have to sell it now socially. What we discuss in public as intellectuals, what is socially and politically acceptable. We don't discuss facts. Please accept them. We all intellectuals only write and talk those things which are acceptable to society and acceptable by peers. Isn't it? You don't write facts. This is the classic way of doing research and communication in the world, around the world. Same thing happens. Now, if you see what all has happened, why there were 90 modifications, everybody criticizes, government had no policy, this. I can assure you that 80% of my suggestions were accepted by the government within 24 to 48 hours. And policy changes were happening. All these things are in public domain on YouTube. Go and see speeches and discussions and panel discussions with politicians. Thankfully, Samvit is not there. We were virtually on every day on TV together. And the Honorable Minister is from the same hometown. So we know pretty well. What I'm trying to say is that it is very important for all the researchers here is, please get out from the so-called economic theories. Go to the realities. All these theories are to justify the facts. But facts are something else. And those facts are not in public. And it will not be, because it will have its own serious political implications. That's one. Number two. Now, whether it is right, whether digitization, please read the precise notifications issued by RBI on 8th November in the evening. Nowhere it is mentioned digitization. For first 15 days, there was no mention of digitization. When things were becoming a little bit politically hot, and when people should not lose patience, and that was most important. Because Supreme Court started making observations from so-called the arguments point of view. Obviously, they will not look at political agenda. They will look at masses. And you have to give a comfort to the masses so that all the people standing in the queue should not revolt. You have to now manage the society. Your political agenda is done. Now, bigger challenge is maintain the law and order. Now, you have to communicate something so that people continue to remain calm and cool. That's a pure political management, nothing to do with economics. And then, if you say that PM does not know infrastructure problem, he knows more than us. Are you saying the PM is not aware what are the challenges in bandwidth and rural economy? He knows more than us. I think we are in illusion that he doesn't know. He knows, or any politician knows more than us, except the fact. They are not idiots. They know everything. They speak, they don't speak is separate. But they are not ignorant. That's why people can vote. If we stand, how many people will vote for us? Please understand, they are more smarter than us. That's one aspect. Second thing which we have to keep in mind is, when you are looking into the whole agenda, you have to engage, you have to continue to engage with people. And you have two things to communicate to the people. Why Mr. Modi said very clearly, I need 50 days from the day one. And at the same day, I said he is too optimistic. My assessment is at least 90 days. This quarter you need full. Because first 30 days you will need to suck out the notes, and then you will need another 60 days to throw back the currency into the system. You need 90 days, that is my estimate. And I did actually calculation. And those who are interested, please read my blogs. All with numbers and calculations are given there. And because every alternate day I was asked to comment by media and other places, so I was putting all those notes together. And a couple of publications also reached to me. Can you write a book on demonetization and simply? It's too early to say. Even if you see this week's RBI report is still not clear. I think you have to wait till April end to get the true impact of demonetization and digitization and everything. Still it's too early, and there are reasons for it. What I'm trying to say in this whole process is, it is very important for all of us to understand that what is visible and what is intended are not generally the same in political work. So don't look at symptoms as the cause. Symptoms are different, causes are different, reasons are different, and implications are different. And as a managers, because we all are manager students here, please learn to read between the lines. What is written on the text is not business strategies. What is given in the newspaper headlines cannot be a national policy. You can't make these decisions in public in advance for your competitors. Do you really make, those who are in corporate world, do you really tell what your agenda is in your competitive world? You don't. You have to be very, very careful. Communications are always need-based, need-to-know basis, not what you want and everything is right to access. No, that is not feasible in this world. So that is one aspect to look at. Another dimension we have to look at is now. Digitization, comfort and everything, fundamentals are wide open. I'm saying from the day one. This country has almost 7 lakh villages. The total bank branches in this country are 1.25 lakhs. What is about digitization? And most of them, 65% are in urban centers. How many villages? Everybody is saying mobile. Mobile is the last connectivity. I need some account to connect from where I can transfer. Where is that bank? We all are talking of last mile connectivity. We have mobile, we have GPS, we have internet. That is insignificant. Where is the bank from where I can connect my mobile for the transaction? You don't have banking system. Where I will, if I am getting as a laborer, my income, where I will keep it? Where is my accounting? Everything will be digitized. I don't trust. Today, even with the credit card system, if there is a dispute happens, it takes months to settle the problems. Why I should trust them? They are not giving me service today as a banking organization. Bank managers don't have a courtesy to call back and say your problem is resolved. Should I trust them when there are millions of transactions? Where is the dispute resolution system in the whole digital system? It's not there. So what I'm trying to say is that yes, PM has done what he was supposed to do. PM has achieved what he was supposed to achieve. Then everybody is saying it is against black money. And I always say the origin of black money is politics. And no mistake. Why? That is the only activity in the country where you can still handle transactions in cash, unaccounted. Did People's Representation Act. From 20,000 they brought to 2. And I have made a very open statement. How many members are there in BJP? The largest political party they claim today, they have a 10 crore member. 10 crore into 2,000, what is the amount? 20,000 crore, I can convert black into white without asking anything. How much you need in elections? So I think there are many other things which is we have to understand. Digitalization and all is like a process, like in a business. Okay, you have to have a canteen, so keep people busy in digitization. Somebody will get busy in something else, somebody will get something busy in that, somebody will talk about technology. I'm sure I can tell you that politicians was spoiling when we all discuss these high-tech things. This is good, people are engaged. And I conclude by saying, I used to work with a very senior politicians. And very often friends used to call me. What your boss has said here, you don't know. And next 10 in the morning you say, and we are sitting together. And some journalist sitting there. And he says, sir, what do you think about X, Y, Z? I'll not take the names. He says, yeah, this is what it is. This is breaking news. He goes out, sends a message, ticker starts. In the evening, prime time, discussions, one after another political analyst. Look, it was never thought that we are making such a serious statement. He was asking something, we just gave a casual opinion because we are sitting with them together on a cup of tea. Earlier the news headline, every day. And people issue. Vijay, what this boss says, this is not relevant. Please, if I have to communicate something from Mr. XY person to another political leader, what is the best thing? Without going in anywhere, you have printed a headline, message is conveyed, my job is done. You keep discussing. I'm using you as a tool. Please understand. I'm not giving you intellectual feed. I have to send some message to you. I have done it. The world is now talking about that message in political system, which is not intention for me. My message is to communicate to another political leader because there is a political bargain going on in the country. And I have to throw my weight around. I have done it. And is that, are we really understanding the game of communication in this country? And that's what I'm saying. Demonetization, if you are looking purely from an economic activity, I think you are misleading yourself. Take it in a wider context of political economy, political, socio-political environment, and other dimensions. Okay, whether political parties or the person who has declared, has they achieved their objective or not? If yes, it was success. For you, it may be failure, it doesn't matter to me. Because I am the creator, I am the initiator. If I have reached my destination, I am fine with it. What happens to my neighbors? Fine. I am not here to take your responsibility to everyone around. And please note down, who are the most critical opposition of demonetization? And that conveys many things. So read those newspapers, take out your old newspapers and try to read and connect the dots, and there is a very clear story. And those stories, you can only see the cover. Inside is not in public domain, that is through intelligence. So what I'm trying to say is that it was a fantastic move. It was a fantastic political move. We as economists, managers will have enough time to gossip around this topic. We will continue to do that, and we will continue to create new stories, and I will be really smiling at all those assumptions because that was not the intention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Energy, for stressing another side image of demonetization. But no, it reminds me of one story that one mother wants to go for a beauty parlor. She has so many children, so she has given one toy. So all of her kids started fighting, and then the time when they are fighting, she uses the time for the beauty parlor. So I think here beauty parlor, your mother is Narendra Modi, and childs are we, and toys we know that what is. But yeah, the intention was for mother to get his something else. Probably it was. But again, what I find, yeah, it has impacted on us, either in a direct way or in an indirect way. When it comes to media plays sometimes, I'll not say always, it is biased, I'll say yeah, it has its own impact. I personally know the person from the media, they have independent opinion, and I'm working along with them from several years. They try to understand the issues and highlight, but sometimes what happens, whatever they know, they cannot disclose it because of other restriction and regulations. But still what I find, media provide a hand-holding platform where we can share our thought process. As a human being, whatever it is, like let's suppose it was a big decision, but definitely it has impacted somehow in the economy, either the positive or negative, there's a issue of discussion, but still it has some impact on economy, and that's why we cannot ignore. That's why our economists, our professors, and even industries, they are talking and they are thinking about it. Would like to request my friend, first of all, I'll invite my media friend in last so that he can summarize and he can give his views. And I would like to say Ravi Shukla in the similar way of Ravi Shukla. But before that, would like to invite my friend Dr. Punia. Because as an entrepreneur and as a professor from both angles, he can highlight the challenges and issues. Don't care about what mother wants to go for the beauty parlor. We are kids. So, as a kids, what problem we faced during that time? Please highlight, sir.
Thank you, Pandit. I am reminded of an anecdote, elephant and three blind men. So, we all interpret reality from our own perspectives. So, discounting that's a political interpretation of the phenomena, technical we have heard, economics we have heard. I am a startup entrepreneur. So, my take on Indian digital payment systems, we sell online. people order our products through Amazon or Flipkart or Paytm, Snapdeal, you would be surprised to know 90% of the orders are cash on delivery. So they are using digital platform to order, but they are refusing to pay digitally. And that's a standard. Like since we went live in September, that's my experience in the last 6 months, 7 months. Without COD, e-commerce refused to take off in India. COD was introduced and e-commerce took off. So people are using digital platforms to order, but refusing to make payments online. So that's something, India is a very interesting study in contrasts. You would see these contrasting themes everywhere. And I have been a student of information technology, information systems. Last 22 years I have been in business, started my first company in 96. And we missed mainframes. India missed mainframes, microcomputers, mini computers. We directly jumped onto PC vending. That's an interesting study in itself. India started IT revolution with personal computers. We missed the whole 30 years of computers and we directly joined personal computers and we started from there. And my belief is we are going to miss landline broadband totally and we are going to jump on the mobile bandwagon and that too on 4G, not even 2G, 3G. India is going to become online on 4G, whoever provides it, Jio, Airtel, that doesn't matter. But India is going to get online on 4G platform on mobiles. Now that is the infrastructure which is going to be there. And payments are only going to take off if it becomes so simple as making a call. I have seen villagers using mobile phones, they don't understand anything, but they simply know how to open up the directory, locate the name of the person in Hindi, if it is North India, in Bengali, if it is West Bengal. It has to be vernacular. They can simply read the names, list of names, pick up the name they want to call and press the call button. If we can make these digital payments that simple, then only these digital payments are going to take off on mobiles. Paytm, UPI, all these are still complicated. I need to open up the app, I need to install the app, I need to register. No, that's not going to take off. There would be some educated percentage of people who would be able to make use of these. If we want to take these digital payments to the masses, it has to be as simple as making a telephone call. Whatever in the background is there, it doesn't matter to the end user. You need to link it to the Aadhaar, you need to link it to the bank account. It's your problem, not the end user's problem. You need to come up with a solution which is as simple as I select the name of the person, I say 500 rupees to be paid to this person, and I say pay. I say call. If I can do that, digital payments will take off. If I can't make that kind of app workable on all phones, it's not going to work. That's it, I think that's the technology session. So that's my take on the technology and the challenges of technology. And whatever apps we are developing are still complicated. UPI says send this message. No, I am not going to do that. The simple end user which is going to make this digital payments possible cannot send those 4 SMS. Whether it is in Hindi or English, whatever you explain, no. That end user cannot send those 4 messages to make the transaction. You need to enable that user interface which says select the name, put the amount, say send. That's it. And my message says you have sent 500, the receiver gets an SMS, I have received 500. Simple. If I can do that, digital payments would go like anything in India. And Paytm and all these would face real challenge with that kind of app. Thank you.
I would like to say one thing. You are totally right on what you said. Actually, the World Bank and the other institutes that are working on digital finance, they started to have been working right now on over the last year and a half over this thing, and they call this approach called consumer centricity. Yeah. So it's a very, very, very important right now. Like most of the focus is actually on that, really.
So this is what I have seen digital payments evolving from. In 93 we got internet in the India for the first time. 91 we got extra 400 systems. So I have seen that system, I have used that system. For 22 years I have dealt with technology. I use Paytm, wallets, banks, online payments, net banking, UPI, Aadhaar-based system, IMPS, app-based systems. So these are fine. For somebody who is educated, who knows technology, it's perfectly fine. But 60% of people still live in villages. That's the challenge. How do I make my Mamaji, who lives in a rural village, to transfer 500 rupees to me? That is only going to, he can call me on phone. I receive calls from my Buaji, they are not literate, they only know Hindi, they can only locate my name in Hindi, they can dial. Taking that analogy further, they can read my name and say, "भैया 500 रुपए देने हैं इसको 101 रुपए भेजना शगुन का बर्थडे पे." That's it, done. They would do that happily. But it has to be that simple. And whatever technology needs to be integrated in the backend, that's the part we as technology provider, as technology developer needs to sort out. We cannot leave that technology integration part to the end user. So UPI, SMS, all integration needs to be taken care of. That's something which Sanjay should look up and come up with an app for. And I'm sure in next 2, 3, 5 years, we would reach that stage, and that's where the digital payments would take off. Like mobiles took off, similarly digital payments would also take off. But we need that maturity in the user interfaces and systems supporting that kind of transactions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Punia. Now, when you speak, it reminds the researcher who always open platform for the students, for researchers. So now, our students, those who are having idea in terms of IT interface and technology version, you have a new problem to work it out. You have to identify that how this Paytm, drawbacks in Paytm and other, so you can develop your own app and coin it and become a successful businessman. You can compete along with the all existing items. Would like to highlight before opening the platform for the discussion, because my students, they are eagerly looking at me, and they are, I'm 200% sure they are having thousands of questions running here and there in their mind. But before, I'll request Ravish to highlight as a common man point, because what I feel Ravish during the demonetization, he was actively involved. He has coverage, he is covering all the entire aspects. So would like to have your views, Ravish. You can give us your views, that how you have seen, what are your experiences, and then we'll open this platform for the discussion and the question and answer.
धन्यवाद पांडे जी, मैं हिंदी में अपनी बात रखूँ। अभी विजय जी ने बड़ा अच्छा मीडिया के रोल के बारे में कहा, हंसी भी आ रही थी, और 8 तारीख की वो शाम थी जब नवंबर में नरेंद्र मोदी जी अपना भाषण देने वाले थे। सुबह से ही न्यूज़ रूम में एकदम हुआफो, किसको बुलाया जाए, किसको नहीं बुलाया जाए, क्या घोषणा करने वाले हैं नरेंद्र मोदी। और आपने सही कहा कि सेना के साथ में मीटिंग उन्होंने किया था, तो सारे लोगों को ये लग रहा था कि सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक के बाद में नरेंद्र मोदी कोई पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ कोई और बड़ा कदम उठाने की कोशिश कर सकते हैं, या कुछ न्यूक्लियर पॉलिसी में चेंजेस कर सकते हैं। शुरू हुआ उनका राष्ट्र के नाम संदेश, फिर से लोग लगे, जब वो पाकिस्तान की बात करते तो फिर बोला जाता न्यूज़ रूम में कि यार किसी रक्षा विशेषज्ञ का नंबर तैयार रखना। फिर वो धीरे धीरे करते हुए काले धन पर आए, तो ये हुआ कि अर्थशास्त्री का नंबर रखना शायद कुछ काले धन पर कुछ बड़ा फैसला कर सकते। अचानक जब उन्होंने 500 और 1000 रुपए के नोट की बात करनी शुरू कर दी, तो एक हमारे सीनियर एडिटर हैं, उन्होंने कहा यार ये कहीं नोट तो नहीं बंद करने वाले, और उसी के 1.5 या 2 मिनट के बाद में उन्होंने कहा कि 1000 और 500 के नोट बंद। किसी को कोई अंदाजा भी नहीं था कि इस तरीके का कोई फैसला आएगा। सारे लोग कहे यार ये डिमोनेटाइजेशन पर कुछ किसको बुलाया जाए, किसको नहीं, बड़ी देर तक ये भी चर्चा का हो रहा है किसको फोन किया जाए। हम लोगों को भी समझ में नहीं, क्योंकि हम लोग एक रिपोर्टर हैं, तो रिपोर्टर के उससे पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से हमारी भी आज तक की लाइफ में कभी ये डिमोनेटाइजेशन शब्द भी हमने नहीं सुना था कि आखिर है क्या चीज, आखिर ये नोटबंदी क्या शब्द है। अच्छा, फिर किसी ने बताया कि नोटबंदी ये है कि ब्लैक मनी पर कंट्रोल करने के लिए, जिनके पास में कैश बहुत ज्यादा पैसा है, उनके पैसे को खत्म करने के लिए। और जैसा कि मोदी ने कहा कि पाकिस्तान से हमारी बहुत सारी करेंसी जो है वो जारी करेंसी आती है, तो एक अंदर से बहुत अच्छी फीलिंग आई कि यार बड़े आदमियों का जो ब्लैक मनी है, जो कि 1 लाख करोड़ रुपया या 50,000 करोड़ रुपया और रखे हुए हैं, उनका रातों रात सफाई कर दिया मोदी ने। हमारा क्या है, हमने तो परसों ही मतलब जितना पैसा निकाला था तो हमने अपने मकान मालिक को दे दिया और 2,000 रुपये मेरी जेब में थे। मैंने अपनी वाइफ को फोन किया, तुम्हारे पास कितने? उन्होंने बोला कि हमारे पास में भी 1,000-1,500 रुपए है। रात को हम लोग बहुत अच्छी नींद सोए। सुबह फिर हम लोग जब ऑफिस आए तो हमने कहा यार ईमानदार हैं हम लोग, टैक्स कटवाते हैं, हमें आज बड़ी अच्छी नींद आई। और रात भर हमारे मकान मालिक जिनके पास 16 फ्लैट थे, जो हमसे कैश पैसे लेते थे किराए का, वो बेचारे परेशान। हमारे और सीनियर थे मतलब कि रवीश कुमार, जिनको आजकल बहुत मोदी जी के उसमें नाम उनका लिया जाता है कि बहुत ही खिलाफ रहते हैं, वो भी सुबह सुबह आए, बोले कहा जी बहुत अच्छा फैसला लिया मोदी जी। और हमें लग रहा है कि जितने धनपति लोग हैं जिनके पास बहुत पैसा है वो परेशान ही होंगे। उस दिन पॉजिटिव स्टोरी हुई सारी मीडिया में। दूसरे दिन पॉजिटिव स्टोरी हुई कि आखिर डिमोनेटाइजेशन के फायदे क्या क्या हैं और ब्लैक मनी पर कहां तक कंट्रोल लगेगा। तीसरे दिन से हमने देखा कि धीरे धीरे लाइन लगनी शुरू हो गई। लोग फोन करने लगे ऑफिस में कि कहीं पर भी आसपास पैसा नहीं मिल रहा है। ऑफिस का एकदम माहौल हुआ कि यार अगर लोग परेशान हैं तो हमें रिपोर्ट करना चाहिए। लोग कहते हैं कि मीडिया सिर्फ एक एंगल दिखा रहा है कि लोग लाइन में खड़े हुए हैं, परेशान हैं। मीडिया का काम आप लोग जैसा नहीं है कि यहाँ पर डिस्कशन करना या रिसर्च करना। हम एक रिपोर्टर हैं, हम जो बाहर देखेंगे वो चीजें हम दिखाएंगे कि अगर हमें यहाँ की रिपोर्टिंग करनी हो तो हम दिखाएंगे कि बाहर से ये आए हुए हैं, आप सर आए हुए हैं, विजय सर आए हुए हैं, इनका इस चीज पर अपना पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू। हम अगर एक एकेडमिशियन का काम करने लगेंगे और हम अगर सोशल कमेंटेटर हो जाएंगे तो फिर भी लोग वहां पर कहेंगे कि मीडिया बायस। हमारा काम है चीजों को दिखाना, जो चीजें हो रही हैं आपके आसपास। उसमें कुछ लोग बेहोश होकर गिर भी रहे थे, कुछ लोग अपने उनकी बेटी की शादी थी, उनको पैसा नहीं मिल पा रहे थे, शादियां कैंसिल हो गई। मुझे एक फोन आया एक नेता का, कहने लगा कि भाई साहब आप ये खबर दिखाइए कि एक लड़की का जो है वो शादी कैंसिल हो गई क्योंकि उसके पास कैश पैसा नहीं था। हमें ये पहले बताया गया कि इस देश के अंदर में तकरीबन 15,000 करोड़ रुपए की ब्लैक मनी है। 4 महीने बीत गए सर, अभी तक ब्लैक मनी। अभी हमने परसों पढ़ा कि 1,15,000 करोड़ रुपया शेल कंपनियों के जरिए ब्लैक मनी को वाइट कर लिया। अब उनको नोटिस दी जा रही है। हमारे नोटिस का हाल आप जानते ही हैं। एक पहली नोटिस जाएगी, 3 महीने के बाद जवाब आया, फिर चौथे महीने नोटिस जाएगी, शायद तब तक 5 साल में नोटिस होकर खेल चलता रहे, मोदी जी रहे या न रहे, फिर दूसरी आए, फिर कोई पॉलिसी चेंज हो जाए। आखिर हमारे देश को हासिल क्या हुआ इससे? अभी तक मैं नहीं समझ पाया एज ए रिपोर्टर की क्या हासिल किया। देश के लिए सही नहीं ना, जिसके लिए था वो शायद उनको हासिल हो गया। यूपी चुनाव में, यूपी इलेक्शन में उनको हासिल हुआ। लेकिन मैं फिर भी आशावान हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि नहीं यार, अगर कुछ हुआ है तो शायद हो सकता है, क्योंकि मैंने एक अखबार में देखा कि एक फोटो छपी हुई थी जिसमें जब राजीव गांधी कंप्यूटर लेकर आए थे तो हमारे बीजेपी के ही जो सीनियर लीडर हैं वो बैलगाड़ी से विरोध करने गए थे संसद भवन में, जिसमें कि अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी थे। लेकिन वही आज चीजें पे कर रही हैं। हम एक IT के सेक्टर में सबसे बड़े हमको मतलब हमारा नाम है पूरी दुनिया में। तो हो सकता है कई बार फैसले ऐसे होते हैं जिनका बहुत दूरगामी प्रभाव पड़ता है और शायद डिमोनेटाइजेशन का। अभी मैं अपने शहर बहराइच गया, बहुत ही छोटा सा शहर है। देखा मैंने कि बस में, रोडवेज की बस, उसमें कंडक्टर जो है वो एक उनके पास स्वीपिंग मशीन थी, जबकि हमारा शहर इलिटरेट मतलब 40% वहाँ की लिटरेसी रेट है। मैं बस में बैठा हुआ था पीछे, मैंने सोचा कि देखा जाए कि छोटे से शहर में कितने लोग आखिर डिजिटल पेमेंट के लिए वो करते हैं। मैंने देखा कि 3 से 4 लोग जो है उन्होंने कार्ड स्वैपिंग कर रहे थे। तो मुझे एक बड़ा अच्छा लगा कि यार चलो कम से कम कुछ चीज़ों का ना धीरे धीरे ही सही, लेकिन नजर आ रहा है जमीन पर भी थोड़ा बहुत प्रभाव इसका देखने में आ रहा है। लेकिन फिर कभी कभी लगता है कि जब हमारे यहाँ एक बिहार के किसी गाँव में बैठकर एक आदमी लोगों के बैंक के पिन नंबर पूछ के और पैसा निकाल लेता है, अच्छे आदमियों का, पढ़े लिखे आदमियों का वो पैसा निकाल लेता है, तो आखिर इसके खतरे कहीं बड़े तो नहीं? लोग डिजिटलाइज के प्लेटफॉर्म पर आ जाएं और उसके बाद में जो गरीब आदमी है, जो सैलरी पेड आदमी है, उसका कहीं पूरा पैसा, ये सारे खतरे भी हैं।
हम जब भी कोई चीज देखते हैं, एक नजरिया हमारा होता है एज ए रिपोर्टर मीडिया में काम करने का। मुझे अपनी संवैधानिक संस्थाओं पर, प्रधानमंत्री जी पर पूरा भरोसा है, लेकिन हम लोग उन चीज़ों को भी हाईलाइट करने की कोशिश करते हैं जो एक आम आदमी से जुड़ी हुई है, कि शायद बहुत सारी चीज़ें इनको ना पता लग पाए, तो हो सकता है मीडिया में कुछ चीज़ें देखकर जो है उनको पता लग जाए कि क्या दिक्कतें हैं। तो हमें जो अभी तक का जो मेरा एक्सपीरियंस रहा है, 1.5 महीने के भीतर काफ़ी लोग लाइनों में लगे, काफ़ी नुकसान हुआ। हमने बहुत सारे दोस्तों, एक मेरा दोस्त है जिसकी टीके की एजेंसी है, उसने बोला कि 1.5 महीने तक यार कोई मोटरसाइकिल खरीदने नहीं। 1.5 महीने तक जो नुकसान देश को झेलना पड़ा, आखिर वो कौन, उसकी भरपाई कहाँ से होगी? चलिए मोदी जी चुनाव जीत गए, लेकिन बाकी और लोग जो है हमारे जैसे टैक्स पेयर, अभी भी मैं देख रहा हूँ कि शुरुआत में थोड़े दिन तक तो लोग डिजिटल पेमेंट करने पर आए। 60 रुपए का दूध हम लोग जो है वो पेटीएम से खरीद रहे हैं, और अगर आपको डॉक्टर की फीस चुकता करनी हो 2000 रुपए, तो डॉक्टर कह रहा हमको पेटीएम से कैश, आप कैश दीजिए हमें। तो बड़ा विरोधाभासों का देश है, और इसको अगर डिजिटल पेमेंट पर लाना है सरकार को, तो डॉक्टर, वकील, राम जेठमलानी की फीस अभी मैं पढ़ रहा था, एक हियरिंग का 22 लाख रुपए। अरे भैया 22 लाख रुपए आप ले रहे हैं, ये कौन से डिजिटल पेमेंट करते होंगे क्लाइंट इनको? चेक देते हैं, चेक देते हैं। अभी शायद हो सकता है चेक देना शुरू कर दें। ये तो पिछले 10 साल से, अगर 22 लाख नहीं हुए माने 10 साल पहले, तो 15 लाख रुपए लेते होंगे, 10 लाख रुपए लेते होंगे। तो सबसे ज्यादा जरूरत क्या है? आपने बताया कि पॉलिटिकल पार्टियां सबसे बड़ी ब्लैक का व्हाइट करने वाली मशीन है उनके पास में। तो सबसे पहले अगर करना हो तो ऊपर से डिजिटलाइज करें खुद अपने को। अभी भी आप देखो सरकारी गाड़ियों के लॉग बुक भरे जा रहे हैं, 50 किलोमीटर, ड्राइवर के ऊपर में 50 किलोमीटर लिख दिया उसने, आगे पैसा लिख दिया। कोई डिजिटलाइज वो नहीं है कि आप अपनी गाड़ियां हो। तो ऐसे बहुत सारी चीजें जिन पर सरकार को ध्यान देने की जरूरत है। मेरे ख्याल से साइबर क्राइम को और ज्यादा मजबूत करने की जरूरत है। आप देखो साइबर क्राइम में कितने सारे क्राइम हो रहे हैं, और उसका कोई, आप एक एटीएम पर जाओ, ज्यादा पैसे निकल जाते हैं। अभी मैंने देखा कि एटीएम पे कई सारे केसेस को लोगों ने रिपोर्ट भी किया कि दूसरा कार्ड वो बना देते हैं। एक ऐसी मशीन, एक ऐसा डिवाइस लगाया एटीएम में, जैसे आपने उसको किया, उसने पूरा पता लगा कि मैग्नेट स्ट्रिप से आपकी सारी क्लोनिंग कर ली, और क्लोन कार्ड बना के बहुत सारे लोग ठगे गए, और आज तक बैंकों से कोई उनका कुछ भी नहीं उनको मिला रिइंबर्समेंट उसका। तो ऐसे बहुत सारे चीजें हैं, और हमें लगता है कि जब तक आपके सिस्टम को आप मजबूत न करिए, तब तक इस तरीके का एकदम से 86% आपने करेंसी को खराब, मतलब एकदम बाहर कर दिया। आप अपने सिस्टम को ठीक करते, आप कह रहे हैं कि ब्लैक का व्हाइट नहीं कर पाए इसलिए हमने छुपाया, सारे लोग कर लिए। कहीं पर भी ब्लैक मनी नहीं पकड़ी गई किसी का, कि कोई ऐसा कुछ ब्लैक मनी पकड़ी गई हो। शेल कंपनियों के जरिए 1,13,000 करोड़ रुपए का आपने ब्लैक का व्हाइट कर लिया, आपके क्या फायदा हुआ छुपाने का मीडिया से? और जहां तक मोदी जी की बात है, एक दिन एक नेता हमारे साथ में बैठे हुए थे, वो भी बड़े करीबी हैं, वो कहने लगे कि नरेंद्र मोदी वो शख्स है कि अखबार की हेडलाइन को झुठाने में उनको बहुत मजा आता है, वैसे फेंक देते हैं। ये हमने देखा, ये छापा टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया में, है ही नहीं वो, तो उसका बिल्कुल उल्टा हमने फैसला लिया। वॉलीबॉल का गेम आपने देखा होगा, एक बंदा हिट करता है और एक बंदा खुद ऐसे खड़ा होकर हाथ करता है ताकि वो लोगों को डॉज दे सके अपने विरोधी उसको, कि खुद खड़ा हो रहा है तो अगले उसको लगता है कि ये शायद मारने वाला, तब तक मार देता है दूसरा। तो ऐसे ही सरकार का जो है, सरकार, अभी आपने देखा कि यूपी चुनाव में मनोज सिन्हा का नाम उन्हीं के मंत्रियों ने फीड किया, सारी मीडिया उसके पीछे पागल, महाकाल के दर्शन कर रहे हैं, मीडिया पीछे से लगी हुई है। अचानक जो है चार्टर्ड प्लेन गया गोरखपुर में, उनको लेकर चला गया, वो मुख्यमंत्री बन गए। तो ये खेल करने में सरकार जो है वो बहुत अच्छी तरीके से उन्हें पता है कि कैसे हम प्ले अप करें और कैसे मेन मुद्दों से ध्यान मीडिया का भटकाया जाए और ऐसे चीजों को देखा जाए जो एक फॉल्स प्लेइंग चल रही है उस पर। तो उनका ये कहना था कि आपने देखा होगा कि गुजरात के जब चीफ मिनिस्टर का ऐलान होना था, इंटरव्यू तक हो गए उनके, दोपहर तक उनसे ये भी पूछ लिया गया कि आप मुख्यमंत्री बनेंगे, प्रायोरिटीज क्या होगी, वो भी बड़े अच्छे से बता रहे थे। पता लगा दूसरे दिन वो डिप्टी सीएम हो गए, सीएम को दूसरा बन गया। तो उनको वो खुद बता रहे थे कि जो भी हेडलाइन बनती है, सरकार तो नहीं, नरेंद्र मोदी की पहली कोशिश होती है कि उस हेडलाइन को किसी भी तरीके से झूठा साबित कर दिया जाए और एकदम चिंदियों की तरीके से ये हेडलाइन ये था ये अच्छी बात है नहीं अच्छी बात है ये बहुत अच्छी बात है कि अगर हेडलाइन जुटाने में ही सारी सरकार लगी हुई है तो बढ़िया बात है अच्छी है ये चलता रहेगा 5 साल तक लेकिन हम ये जरूर आप लोगों को आज हम ज़्यादा सुनने आए थे इसलिए क्योंकि मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ आप लोगों से क्योंकि आप लोग काफ़ी सारा रिसर्च करते हैं हम ये जरूर जानना चाहेंगे कि आने वाले दिनों में डीमोनेटाइजेशन का क्या इम्पैक्ट हमारे देश पर पड़ेगा। हम लोग तो जो चीज़ें हो रही हैं उसको दिखाते हैं आप लोगों का काम है कि जो चीज़ें होने वाली हैं उसको आप लोग बताएं तो मैं बिल्कुल इस सेशन में यही चीज़ जानने की कोशिश करूँगा।
Thank you, Shukla. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for highlighting the stats and another side of story. You sketched the map that what our villages are. But you pointed out very interesting thing that you find few persons who are swapping the machine in Bahraich also. It reminds me that mama bhi beautiful ho gayi aur kuch bacche bhi management seekh gaye. But it required to become more manager so to understand and to provide some support our economy. Now the entire session is open now, the panel is open. I'll request my students, those who want to ask some question, first introduce yourself, that who you are, what your class and what's your question. And please clearly specify that you are asking question with whom. Either you are asking with Professor Nayak, or Shukla ji, or Punya ji, or Stana ji, or Patke ji, or even our Professor Petko. So what's his question? And who are the probable person can answer one by one. Any question?
A number of deaths, it led to serious difficulties in the families of individuals. People who were supposed to be hospitalized, they didn't have the cash. And this has been reported. I was very happy to get the input from Mr. Shukla when he said that their idea is not to give any sort of opinions, researchable or otherwise. Their function is to report what happens in the society at large. And what they noticed was that there were long queues. They have to report that. So this is the issue. So it's not what the government's intention actually was. The intention was laudable, but the issue is whether the policy option that the government chose, whether that was right. And my feeling is that it was incorrect.
Well, I'm not actually you can't tell us.
Vijay? Yes, sir. So my question is to Sanjay Fatke. You being a consultant in fintech companies, we talked about how the booming of the fintech companies happened. And as sir said, we were actually forced to use all these methods during December. Now during that was actually freebie to all the fintech companies because they thought that a huge potential is happening and they all came across. And we know that whatever goes online is not safe. And that has been specifically mentioned by Sir TK. And we know that it is not safe at all and people are not going to move into that. So that safety factor is always there. And also peer-to-peer lending is booming up with Bitcoins and also the Amazon coins. Everything is coming up. And we know that the security reasons will always stand on top. And how are you going to tackle this particular issue in the growth of the fintech companies? How are you foreseeing it?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think some of the companies did have a massive bonanza, and I'm actually reminded of a friend who was with the Paytm founder the day this thing happened. There was some, I think, award show that was going on. He was practically sitting next to him, like I'm sitting next to Vijay, and he heard this news and he literally jumped. He basically said that this is like a boon from the heaven for them. I think the point is, in any big change, there will always be some kind of early movers, some late movers, some who get benefited disproportionately just being at the right place at the right time. So I think you just have to see it in a continuum of number of years or probably decades, as you rightly said. It's a behavior change that probably will play out over the next 10, 20 years, and it will actually play out through people like you who are a lot more technology, aware, and it obviously has to trickle down to the last mile. I think that's the key challenge, that everyone here is on the same page, where it has to be easy, it has to make sense, it has to be cheap. So I mean, why should there not be a law which actually says that below a certain amount, let's say 1,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees, whatever is a very reasonably low number, all digital transactions should be free of cost. Why can't that be the case? So some of these things are still work in process. I think they will eventually happen. I would think it's people like you who can make some of those changes happen by bringing the right new business models. Because obviously, world is changing, and it's changing really fast at this point in time.
Last question from the students there.
Sir, I have two questions. My name is Gautam Sarma. I am from MBA. First question of mine is to Sanjay sir. Sir, you mentioned that demonetization was not just a single step, it was a series of steps coming from Aadhaar to UPI, then Jan Dhan Yojana, demonetization, GST, and now BHIM. So, don't you think that if this was so pre-planned, so highly planned from the back end, then it would have been hard to shut down mouths of people for so long? And next question is to Vijay sir. You said that communication of demonetization was a camouflage for some other political agenda, and it makes us believe that it was a red herring perspective of something of the greater political agenda or of something, some of the other sorts. And you mentioned that we must read between the lines of some newspapers. So three news headlines stand out to me at the moment. First was removal of Raghuram Rajan. Second was rise of Jio just before demonetization. And third is Paytm's advertisement of Narendra Modi on the next day of the demonetization act. So are these three theories, are these three headlines in any way related to what the political agenda, the greater political agenda might have been? Something of that sort.
I'll take the less interesting question. So if you think about it, it's basically a massive process of digitization that is happening across the country. You look at the personal side of, so you basically have a B2C and B2B. These are the large two pools of transactions, right? B2C is where any business is dealing with the consumer. Now, what is happening is the Aadhaar comes up as a platform around which the entire B2C infrastructure, which was earlier based on a lot of other call it a bank branch, which required you to actually go there, sit with the bank manager and understand, and he has to have trust in you and so on and so forth. So the entire trust, which was more human based, is effectively getting driven to a technology based ecosystem. That is the first level of that. There are a lot of risks, there are a lot of issues, as has been recently talked about as well. But I think this is a transformation that is pretty much unidirectional. I think we can keep talking about whether this is the right thing or wrong thing. I think the history just sort of goes in that direction, unless there is some massive counter effect. So you look at that Aadhaar, that is B2C, and you look at GST, which is B2B. So as Vijay rightly mentioned, GST will essentially ensure that all transactions are recorded. All transactions between any buyer and a large, let's say a small seller and a large buyer, which is pretty much the situation with lots of SMEs in the country, right? Which would be supplying to large buyers. They might not be disclosing their full income, and that's in a long-winded way you can connect it back to 2% people paying tax in some sense. So all of that becomes online. All of that becomes a data that a bank can actually use for lending in future. So in future you may not have to, as a business, give your 3 years annual accounts and returns. All you might say is that take this 2020, take access to my GST returns, which tells my sales and purchases, who are my sellers, who are my purchases. I am giving you access. So based on that, you can come up with a credit rating. So the thing is, it's a completely different ball game where everything is moving online. I don't think finance is particularly different. I think every industry is moving online. So it's just as to how fast we adjust to it, and there will be laggards and there will be winners in that. And now for the more interesting part.
None of these three headlines are of significance in this agenda. There are other headlines which I think you have to go back and re-look into the newspaper. The current dispensation lost Delhi election. Second, they have lost Bihar election. Then Bengal election. Okay? How many more you want to lose to retain the credibility for your all programs of 2022? Nothing is concluding in 19. Please understand. This is a very crafty political agenda when I look at it. What is the agenda and why people lose and win elections in this country? And who are the people, those who are shouting the most? And who are the people, those who lost? Connect the dots. And then see the impact. So what I'm trying to say is that, again, you have to understand which headline makes sense and which does not. So it is very important. That's what I always say, that problem with the most of the MBA colleges, and I'm telling you, I'm from Ahmedabad, the least utilized library ever I have seen is in IIM campuses. This is sad and tragic. Because our managers only believe in mugging in classes, writing an exam and seeking grades. That will never give you conceptualization. The cutlery is same around the world. What extra you are going to bring on the table as a businessman? And the fact of the matter is, when we recruit people, I'm the board of a couple of companies, I don't look at CVs. Anyways, 90% of the CVs are fictitious. How am I going to check which competition you won in which country? Is there any mechanism with which I can check? How many grade which you got, and my major was marketing, and how much you got, and it's a 9 point out of 10. Where is the mechanism and time for me to cross check and also for 1 out of 100 candidates do all this nonsense? Accept the fact. So what we do? Whoever is the candidate sitting there, we say, this is the situation, tell me as a manager how you are going to handle it. If he has a wider perspective, and it will only come more you read, more you interact. It doesn't come by marks. That will help you in conceptualization and things. But where is the application? And application and utility should come from when you read more newspapers, more analytical newspapers, not headlines. So it's an evolution of mindset. And we have not learned as managers in this country. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to connect the different headlines. What is the agenda? Even I'm saying, forget about what happened at that day. Today you are sitting here. You have seen there is a demonetization. You have seen afterthoughts. Whole lot of data is flooded. It's not that there is no data. How many times you have gone to RBI sites and looked into weekly reports and changes in the market behavior? They are facts. Every transaction is recorded. How many of you, while you are doing, I've seen even a newspaper analysis or even the researchers, how many of them have seen week to week developments? And I can quote 2 examples and that will tell you. On 15th of November, okay, 8th November was this announcement. On 15th of November, there was an announcement that political parties can keep cash. Okay? At the same time, if you see that on 7th of November, in cooperative banks, the cash deposit was 33,000 crore. In month's time, it went as high as 83,000 crores. Who handles cooperative banks? Farmers and politicians. What is the money in farmers? And you are giving loan waiver. So there is no money in the hands of farmers. So whose money is that? Minute you announce that political parties can keep old currency, between 13th of December to 18th of December, the money from 87,000 crore came down to 35,000 crore in 7 days. 50,000 crore kahan gaya? Who is raising this issue? Where are those account details? None of the media raised because journalists don't read. They only watch TV of competitors and they say, apne ko bhi ye story karne ka. During demonetization, I was on 5 studios on a daily basis. And from that day till day, I'm either in some studio or writing some magazine. Even if you pick up my latest Outlook, you will see my article I wrote 2 days back, even Rashtriya Sara you will see, and trade journals are separate. What I'm trying to say is that, please go into details. Don't make opinion based on perceptions and headlines. And don't assume that the economist who is writing is God. He has his own personal bias. What is your opinion and what is your bias? It's going to be different. that based on your experience and expertise. So I think it's very important for us to look at it. So all the three headlines which you said is immaterial. There are other headlines which are important.
Before summarizing the session, I think Mr. Agrawal, he would like to say something during the time, so I stop. Sorry.
I won't be here tomorrow.
First lecture, first session, as far as our takeaway is concerned, because we were able to see a lot of dimension to the one particular problem which was upfront, the demonetization, the political view, the technological part, everything. So right now we are moving on to the second session, the fundamental drivers behind Indian money supply. So for the chairs for the session is Samuel Wine and Rajneesh Kumar, both from Queen's University of Belfast, and we have the moderator, our own faculty, Ayana Bhattacharjee from Jindal Global Business School.
I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists, starting off with Mr. Tushar Arora, Senior Economist, Assistant Vice President at HDFC Bank. He has done BA Honours in Economics from Kidorimat College, Delhi University, and an MA Economics, International Trade, Public Finance, Microeconomics, and Econometrics. He has served 2 years as an economist and also Vice President at Yes Bank.
We welcome you, sir. And the second panelist for the day is Dr. Vinod Vyaslu, Professor and Vice Dean from Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. He has earned PhD from the School of Business Administration in the University of Florida. He has taught at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore and XLRI Jamshedpur. He held a chair in the Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. He had also assisted as Economic Advisor for Small Scale Industries in the National Small Industries Corporation, Delhi. We welcome you, sir.
Then we would have Dr. S.K. Shanti. She's the head of Indian Development Foundation. She has served as a chair professor in Great Lake Institute of Management. She has done PhD in philosophy and macroeconomics from the Institute for Financial Management and Research. Welcome you. Thank you.
Now we hand over the session to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Okay, yes, 3 more were supposed to come and due to some urgent commitments, they could not turn up. Anyway, I'm hopeful we'll all have a very interesting session, a lot of discussion and a lot of good discussion about this particular topic. As such, we'll keep around 20 minutes for each of the panelists, and then we'll also open the floor to further discussions. So I would like our chair for this session to take over. Yes. Off to Samuel.
Much to Jindal University we named this the fundamental drivers behind the money supply. An interesting fact about this entire conference from the start on, right, is that it shows willingly to take people from different backgrounds. Okay? So we talked this morning with Professor Bassini about possibilities of organizing e-payments and how to set them up legally. We also have somebody in sociology and of course in literature, amongst others. And today, now we will talk about the economic section behind it, right? The economic section of the conference, but which is by far not the most relevant section. For a very simple reason. That everything we observe that happened on the 8th of November and the aftermath is something yet unseen, in my generation anyway, but also for many people in common who have never thought that demonetisation would happen in such a way that 86% of the money would be taken away all at once overnight. Right? Now, while this morning we heard a lot about backgrounds and political implication, especially Mr. Sadama this morning talked about the politics behind it, right, and mentioned that it was something really pushed by the Prime Minister, and that the Prime Minister did this in order to be re-elected, rather than thinking about possibilities and about implication, for he never consulted any people who have economic knowledge, right, would be scientists or intellectuals for that matter. So the fundamental drivers are not only, I believe, any economic indicators, like one could immediately think of interest rates, right, or of the amount saved by the population, consumption, right. But the fundamental driver of liquid money, really, right, the fundamental driver of liquid money is one thing and one thing only. It is the trust that people put into a currency. It is, if you look at the rupee bill, you will find something very similar to the pound sterling, namely that the governor of the central bank writes on every bill, right? It is printed on every bill, I hereby promise the bearer to pay the sum of £20 or 500 rupees, right? So the idea behind liquid money, I mean, a bill is worth a few pennies in terms of production, it's only paper. The idea behind it is pure trust. The only main driver is trust at the end of the day, right? And while we could spend, and I hope we will spend, a very enjoyable panel and a very enjoyable panel discussions about the different drivers of liquid money and money supply in India, I would like to remind that the main and single most important driver is indeed trust. And I do look forward to a discussion about whether or not you think that the move of the government, as we saw it happening on the 8th of November, was not somewhat affecting this trust in a negative way. Right? I mean, money was declared, was officially declared not to be legal tender anymore. And we also remember the day, which is adding insult to injury to a certain extent, that on the 15th of November, not coping with the situation, a new regulation was passed that political parties were still allowed to use cash. Right? So we really had a two-citizen system, right? Where the average person, the average citizen, was not allowed to rely on cash payments, but political parties or people affiliated to the government were indeed allowed to do it. I do believe, looking at it, that it was a very populistic approach, right? A very populistic thing to do. Many people either say it was the best thing that could happen in India, others say it was the worst thing that could happen in India. The way it was done could very objectively have been done in a much better way. So I mean, a very, a prime example is starting to print a 2,000 rupee bill instead of the new 500 rupee bill. So nobody could use them because they couldn't give you all the change. And I do remember a quote. From Nehru, who said, "The people of India always call me the Prime Minister, but I call myself the first servant of the state." And we should ask ourselves if the current government was indeed truly serving the state they should serve in the first instance, or if the demonetization, or the way it has been done, was not indeed affecting most people in a negative way for a very small payout. Because did we get rid of corruption in India? No, we didn't. Did we get rid of every criminal activity and the grey market in India? No, we didn't. But what happened is we heard about individual tragedies, such as a gentleman living in the Indian provinces who brought his son to a hospital and couldn't pay the hospital bill because he didn't have any legal currency. Right? So unfortunately the son passed away, which is always reminding me of the worst mistake a state servant can do, namely to sacrifice an innocent rather than saving a guilty man. And I do believe that the lack of trust which is now built into this currency system was indeed on the cost of on the back of innocent people in order to pursue a few guilty ones. Thank you very much.
So it's very well put it because no one has seen an experiment of this big of a scale. So there is whatever we need to wait to see all the results what can happen. I mean, some estimates show that the cost of this whole exercise is around 1.3 trillion rupees. The question is whether this much of cost is worth it for whatever purpose it's going to serve. Maybe it's corruption, or maybe it's crime, or maybe it's bringing the money to the formal sector. And essentially it is the consequences are faced mostly by the poor people. That was one of the things that one could expect. Whereas it was made as a move to support the poor and take black money from the rich. But I mean, at least it proved out to be a way where it was more popular, which means that popular among the poor people who form the majority of the society, and which is brought by the elections, after all the elections at the municipal level to the state level that happened after this event. And informal sector essentially is poor people and informal sector. I mean, they are also very related because they are essentially the same in some sense. But the thing is, will it turn out to be fruitful? I mean, in future, suppose the informal sector becomes formal by this forceful conversion to cashless economy or electronic economy, which will help you to go to bring it in the formal sector. And finally, it's about corruption and crime. I mean, maybe it was stopped for a while, but will it come back? Because as we know, I mean, it's not about the black money, it's about the way you generate can be black or white, right? So in that sense, is it a big enough signal of a bold move that can be taken again, and which can again, of course, I mean, people talk about GDP growth rate. I mean, such fast growing economy, it can really would have been the worst, and some people argue that it can be the best time to do it because it's healthy growing economy, so that's the time you should do it. And some people argue the opposite. I mean, if it was running so smooth, so good, why would you do it at this point? And again, I mean, we don't know, but I mean, the figures of the Q4 of last year, it shows that, I mean, there are some questions about this figure itself, but still, I mean, this figure showed. So essentially, this is, I come back finally to the same thing. It's one of the topics that we as an economist like very much because we can have so much to explain and so much to say. So I guess.
Thank you very much, Professor Kumar, for this introductory talk. So as it is clear that this issue of demonetization since November has plagued the nation, not only in terms of creating a currency crisis, but in terms of having so many discussions, so many deliberations, and trying to understand the effects of it. Now, given this, we will be focusing more on the drivers of Indian money supply. And of course, it's quite clear to us also by now that money has taken different forms over time. It started off with metal coins, moved on to paper currency, to credit cards, and the latest thing is, of course, the electronic payments, which is, of course, boosted by this whole issue of demonetization. So let's have an interesting discussion centering around this particular topic. I would like to start the discussion with Mr. Kushal Arora, followed by Professor Vinod Vyaslu, and then Dr. Shanti. Okay, off to Mr. Kushal Arora.
On central bank policy, and these such reports are very very much liked by our clients. And let me tell you the last report last week when the central bank was meeting for the monetary policy. Before that policy, I came out with a report, and the title of that report was liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. That in a sense explains what really is the focus of the central bank right now. Generally central banks, at least in the developing countries, we watch out central bank moves primarily for interest rates, whether they're reducing interest rates or whether they're hiking interest rates. This time, the expectation was that RBI will do nothing with the interest rates, but markets were anticipating their moves as far as the liquidity is concerned, as far as the money supply management is concerned. So let me not go into history as to what were the drivers of money supply, a few years back, but what are the drivers right now? What is the central bank focusing right now on? 2 years back, there was a big shift in central bank policy making in India. RBI was given a clear mandate that as a central bank they would be targeting the inflation level in the country, and the focus of the entire policy would be just to control inflation within a particular target range, and that target range is around 4 to 6%. And your interest rates, your money supply, everything will be in a line to that inflation level, which is required to be maintained for the economy as a whole. Now, after demonetization, obviously, a lot of things changed. A lot of money flow, came back into the banking system. I think if I don't know if you guys are aware, at the latest count, the banking sector is flushed with around 4 trillion rupees of excess money. Now, what do the banking sector does with that amount of money is something which everybody is worried about. It is leading to distortions in the bond market. People are investing in some of the people are investing in risky assets. Assets at price which are unwarranted. Yields are very low at the short term, and this money supply issue is something which is at the core of monetary policy at the moment. Now, what central bank wants this money supply is at a neutral level. That is, at a level at which it should not lead to inflation. It should not be contractionary for growth. So it should be at somewhat a neutral level. But right now it is in excess of around 4 trillion rupees. So RBI policy, I think, in the near future would be to bring that money supply into a neutral level. They would try and absorb that liquidity out of the system and would kind of control the money supply in the near future. That's what the near-term policy of the central bank is. Now, how does RBI intends to do that? There are various measures in this regard. Often from the developed world, maybe if you talk about the ECB, they have something called deposit facility, where banks park their excess money with the central bank and they're paid some amount on that. Reverse repo is also something which is functioning in India right now. They park around certain part of the excess money is parked with the RBI, and RBI pays around 5.75% to the banks. There's a new facility which might be launched maybe in 1 month or 2 months time, which is called the standing deposit facility, which will help RBI absorb the excess money from the banking system without the need of a collateral. So these are certain things which, as a central bank, is they are thinking of, and could lead to active management of money supply in the near future. So the essence is that interest rates have taken a back seat, and it is all about liquidity management at the moment for the central bank. And what they're trying to target is a particular level of inflation. And if that inflation is achieved, I think the money supply would remain unchanged. If it is not achieved, they would try and curtail the money supply around that level. So the rest of the things doesn't really matter at the moment. It is only about inflation and liquidity management for the RBI. I think I can stop there, and I can come back again if there are questions.
So summarizing, as Mr. Tushar Arora just pointed out, it's all about liquidity and actually extracting away or contracting the excess liquidity that exists. So we'd like to move on to Professor Riyasu for his comments.
Thank you very much. There's an old saying that economists are rushing where engines get wrecked. I think this is one of those topics where there's a very high risk that you behave like economists, not agents. Now, I'll get back into a little more of a textbook kind of context in talking about the money supply equation. The standard, of course, is the old equation, MV equals PT, which is a tautology. It just describes a transaction, country's transactions in a rather simple way. And the way we can go into this is not look totally just at the MV part of it, but break down the MV into its major components. And I think that it's instructive to do that here. Because if you look at M1 as the cash component of money supply, M2 which is the bank deposits, and M3 which is the credit, which is the overall money supply. What happened was that the M1 part of it was reduced by 86%. So if we had 100 in circulation, then from midnight of November 8th, we had only 14.86 was taken away, and the actual cash in circulation contracted to this extent. Now, that should be a pretty drastic thing in any given situation, particularly in an economy where cash transactions are a large part of the day-to-day life of people. But it doesn't stop just at that. A large part of the 86% that was taken out of the system, delegalized, call it what you like, the condition was that it is to be put into the banks. And that's the point that you made, that the banks have a lot of money right now. So, and at the last count, what I heard was that 97% of it has come back. That 3% may be counterfeit or whatever it is. But that means almost all the money has come back, whether it was black or white, it's come back. But there were a few caveats into the overall system. First, on the remaining, on the 86% that was delegalized, it wasn't completely delegalized. You spoke about trust, but then there were certain conditions put in. If you had a lot of these old notes, you could use them to pay off property taxes. All across India, municipalities have had a bonanza because overdues of property taxes suddenly filled up, and across the country, property taxes have been paid by people using money that's not money. It's a bit of a stretch of the imagination. These are notes declared to be not legal tender, but you could use it to pay taxes. In the same way, small businesses could use stores of such money to pay back loans to public sector banks. So a large number of so-called defaults or bad loans or whatever suddenly changed nature because money that was not money was used to pay back a loan that was a loan. It's a little bewildering, but this is what happened. So the question of trust is absolutely essential to this particular issue, because on both of these things, the benefit went to those who had cash, which in this situation is by definition holders of black money. So there was something of a trust issue more than we normally look at in economics. The second thing is that while a large part of this money went back into the banking system in the form of accounts, genuine accounts, Jan-Dhan accounts, whatever it was, it wasn't like a normal bank deposit because there were restrictions on its use. While an electronic use could be made of this money through an electronic payment, withdrawal of cash was very, very severely limited. At first it was 2,000 rupees a day, then it was 4,000 rupees a day, and then it went up a little bit. The point I'm trying to make is that although you had legitimate money in your bank account, if you were running a small-scale industry, you could not draw money to pay wages in a country where weekly wages or monthly wages were paid in cash. So there was a disruption that took place as a result of this particular policy, which did not affect everybody. It affected that segment of the country. We can call it informal, we can call it formal, we can call it black. It's very difficult to say because it's not money that's black, it's the transaction that's black. So to that extent, there was a disparate changeover in behavior, and its welfare effects have to be looked at. For example, those of us who live there used to buy our vegetables on the roadside. Well, once you had no cash, you couldn't do that anymore. So what do people actually do? We go to the modern supermarket which accepts a credit card. But what does the supermarket do? It bought from these roadside vendors at distressed prices. So they would, I didn't really feel the pinch, but those who were hard hit were sort of had a double whammy to deal with. Now, the M2 also meant that there was the banks were flushing funds. To a large extent, it was expected that these funds would disappear once normalcy was restored. It hasn't yet been restored, so it's not such a short run as we thought about it. The banks have to pay interest on it, and all the problems that you talked about are absolutely valid. But these things are not translating into entry and credit, because that happens when businesses borrow, working capital, for new investments, and so on. And that is not happening. Whatever the reasons are, whether the annual spirits have been released or not. Now, here also there is another issue, and this becomes one of the school of economics you belong to. In the old Keynesian school, the government would take the plunge, borrow the money, run a deficit and build roads or bridges or whatever. But we now live in a world where governments are not supposed to do that. And this is the good government is one that does very little. So as a result of it, the banks really can't lend to the government because the government is not supposed to borrow and so on. So what do? You have this thing called quantitative easing, where you create credit in banks, and then the banks are, now if that happens in the US, the bank can take it and put it in the Indian stock market, which is what happened. But what happens here? So you've got a liquidity problem, and the liquidity problem gets a little worse. So on the other side of the credit thing, there is liquidity in the market, and there is no clear prospects of investable projects or a shelf of projects in the private sector. This is not to say there is no need for it. There is a need for many kinds of things. But within the overall market framework, it does not make sense for many people to borrow, even at the prevailing lower rates of interest, so the banks are flush with funds. Now, how does this work itself out? Rajneesh mentioned the shift to digital payments. It happened to a small extent. Companies like Paytm became instantly famous, though your boss said that there is no business model there. But the overall part of this is that there was a substitution effect in one part of the economy. Uber gained in business, but the auto rickshaws of Delhi suffered. So there is substitution effects whose welfare effects we have yet to calculate. We have not done so. It's not that the Uber people are rich, they are not. So it's a very complicated thing that we have to do. We've also got to understand what this money coming back means as far as the black economy is concerned. The expectation was that money that was genuinely black would not come back. It could get extinguished, and there were a lot of theories as to whether dividends could be paid to the central government and so on. But if the money has come back, then does it mean it was not black in the first place? Or is it that black has a different kind of meaning and somehow it's coming? What does it mean that the zero balance accounts started by the government, the Jan Dhan accounts, that a large number of them suddenly had a large amount of money, to the extent where my old teacher, Jagdeep Bhagwati, said on TV that there is a redistribution taking place because rich people are putting money in poor people's accounts. Is that what happened? So there are a lot of complications in this, but at the end of the day, not enough time has passed for us to actually say this because the data is not yet come. There's only one other point that I want to make, and that is the point you again made, which is that the last figure of data, it says 7.1% growth of GDP, and people are sort of surprised by this. But the point is, I don't think it's a false figure. If you look at the way by which these advanced estimates are made, in a normal year, what is done is, first of all, in quarterly data, you don't have very much data that comes in. For the well-organized business sector, there is some data that comes in. And in a normal year, what is done is that you take that 3 months data, make your estimate of the kind of business or growth that has taken place, calculate it for the formal sector, and in a normal year, you assume that the same rate has taken place in the informal sector. You put it together and then you announce an advanced figure, which is subject to revision as more data comes in. Now that is exactly what was done this year. But there are two things that are relevant in understanding this. One is, the year before there was a revision of the estimates and the base, as a result of which December 1 year ago the base was low. So on a low base the number looks rather high compared to what it would be otherwise. This is a purely statistical kind of game, but it tends to give a larger number. The second point of it is that this procedure of imputation, which is acceptable in a normal year, I have doubts as to its use after November 8th, which is anything but normal. We have no data at all. Now, if I were the chief statistician sitting in the CSO, what would I do? I think all you can do is, this is the well-established procedure. I'm not fiddling anything, I don't have any data, so I go with it, and I say it's 7.1. Later on, when data comes in, my guess is it will go down by how much, there's nobody who can say anything about it. But this is, I don't think, a fudged figure. It is a proper figure. It is a proper figure using the statistics. I don't want to accuse government or anybody else. But when you look at the way in which we are done, and we are perfectly happy with it under normal times. So we just cannot work with this figure today because of the reasons that I have given. So we have to wait. So it's the old economist position saying that yes, any of these things is possible. I would guess it's a slight downturn, but the magnitude of the downturn is something that we have to wait and see. I just want to end up with a last comment on the trust issue. Now, yes, our currency notes have a promise by the governor of the Reserve Bank. And if I go with a 100 rupee note, he'll give me 250 rupee notes and keep his promise. That's fine. It's fiat money anyway, it's by trust. The point about it is, if you look more closely at the Reserve Bank of India's notes, above the signature of the governor, there is a grand declaration that it is guaranteed by the Central Bank of India, by the central government of India. And this is where I want to end about the trust issue, because if you read the constitution, there is no such thing as the central government of India. So, who will sue? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. It was nice and quite interesting to know about the kinds of money supply that we have, the four measures that we have, and specifically how M1 really reduced because of the reduction in the currency in the hands of the public. And of course, you also mentioned how disruption affected only a section of the population. And then it was interesting to even note why there is still so much liquidity but not enough demand for loans in the economy, even at such low interest rates. Even though there is of course requirement but not enough demand, which is quite alarming. And then the discussion about the growth rates, which has been in the news of late because people are still anticipating robust measures to understand what exactly happened, but as he mentioned, it's too early to comment on the growth rates because we do not really have enough data as of now. It's going to only take some more time till we even have enough data to analyze the total welfare effects. So with that, moving on to Dr. Shanti's comments on the topic.
Thank you. Thanks, Kaban, for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here and meeting you after a while. I am not going to be directly talking about drivers of black money, drivers of money supply, etc. Two gentlemen have done a good job of analyzing the macroeconomic equations that give rise to money in circulation. But IDF, my institute, had done a little bit of work on finding out the impact of black money on so-called informal sector. Because at the time, if you remember, when this black money, this delegalization was done, the government's intention was twofold. One, it said, was to control the black money in the economy. And I think it came to the conclusion that there was a lot of black money in the country by the simple fact that the cash holdings in the public was at a historic high and higher than any other country in the world. So the government probably thought that it must be because much of it is black money and tax has been evaded on this, and therefore, so that was the thinking perhaps. Of course, intentions can never be proved. And the second objective of this was that they will eliminate fake currency. Now, fake currency was coming in the form of 500 and 1,000 rupee notes. And therefore, the government thought that by delegalizing this 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, they will be able to put paid to the fake currency, which was leading to its own, problems with terrorism, financing terrorism, and cross-border whatever and whatnot. Now, the contrary position to that would be that in India, fake currency exists, but it is a very small fraction. It's suppose a professor in Calcutta ISI has estimated this to be around 0.025% of the total cash. Therefore, it does not really warrant the kind of the magnitude of assault that was perpetrated on people like us. But personally, I think we all did okay, right? But yes, I do agree with Dr. Vyaslu that we had to go to the supermarkets to buy our daily vegetables. Otherwise, we would have got the same bunch of vegetables for 30% less. I mean, that much happened. And so this liquidity management issue that is coming up, I don't really understand very well. Maybe you can explain later, because the liquidity was already there. It was only a question of where the liquidity was. The liquidity was in the hands of the people. It was not in the banks. So, but the currency was there in circulation. So it was a redistribution from the public at large to the banks. And the banks, yes, have a problem now, because they have to. They are now sitting on top of excess deposits, and there is not much credit offtake happening, and therefore it is a problem for the banks. But the liquidity has always been there, it just got redistributed. And of course you will have to also give that base interest that you give to your depositors, so you do have a problem. So I guess the central bank and the rest of the banks in India are working on how to make banks more profitable. So like I said, we will, we did see, for example, in other countries like Venezuela, when something like this was done, people took the streets. People were violent, because this is not, this kind of a shocker will lead to that kind of a reaction from people. The question to ask is why didn't it happen in India? Why was it that people stood in lines for ATM withdrawals, stood for 7 hours, 8 hours, and still there was no recorded event of assault or any kind of public sort of damage of property. These things happen in India too. It's not that Indians are so peaceful that they don't do it. It happens during election times and whatever and whatnot, but it didn't happen here this time, and that is a very surprising thing to me. I think that many of us thought that, okay, there is so much of pain and suffering and people are really standing in lines, but the people who were standing in the lines did not complain. Why? Because I think deep down they were happy. They thought that the government is going to nail all those rich people who are driving around in Mercedes Benzes. Right? So that is the reason why the people did not take to the streets. There was a hope that this actually may deliver the goods in terms of eliminating black money. Now, I completely agree with Rajneesh that, this one measure is not going to eliminate black money. Now, it has to be followed up. Like you said, this is a stock of black money. And again, it didn't eliminate anything. 98%, 98.4% in fact, came back into the banking system. So, what was the black money component? The Reserve Bank of India has still not put out the numbers about exactly how much currency came back into the banks in terms of 500 and 1,000 notes that were demonetized. They are apparently still counting the notes, right? So we still don't know. But we know that it is definitely about 98% of the so-called demonetized cash. So where was the black money, right? So how do you control? This is not the way. This is not the way to control black money. In India, people don't hold black money in cash. They hold it in assets, they have real estate, they have gold, they have various other avenues that are nicely set out, and that is where the money goes. So, and yes, the Jan Dhan transaction has happened. Again, I don't know who owns the money. Whether the Jan Dhan account holders own the money, or the person who has put the money there owns the money. So this is a complete mess. So, but as a position, I mean, if I were to take a position on whether what was done was even halfway welcome, I would say yes, it was halfway welcome for the following reason. That there are unintended consequences of policy. So when this was done, presumably to control black money and to eliminate fake currency, the consequence has been that the people who were hitherto unbanked, hitherto not part of the formal monetary sector, are now getting connected to the formal monetary sector. And this is a good development. Yes, initially banks will have a tough time managing the liquidity, but this position has to adjust, and it is not just a monetary problem. It will adjust only when the real economy picks up. The money is only a derivative. People don't demand money because you can eat it. You can't. When you want food, you demand money so that you can pay for food. So it's a derived demand. So unless the economic activity picks up, the monetary adjustment will not be fully played out. But that we have to see. That is why this growth rate is becoming so important. Is it 7%, 7.1, 7.5, 7.7? These are all number games. Each way IMF gives a number, World Bank gives a number, our finance ministry gives another number. So everyone is giving different number. And well, in India the data situation is such that the actual GDP growth rate will be known 2 years later. So until then, if you have the patience and wait and calculate, we will know in due course of time in 2019 what the exact growth rate in 2016-17 was. Until then we have these estimates, right? So government puts out an estimate, Reserve Bank of India puts out an estimate. Based on these estimates we economists work, because we need data, so we cannot wait for 2 years, 3 years to do our work, so we do that. So the question that we asked was, so there was this huge discussion in the media, and we were thinking that if this demonetization, legalization really had an impact, where is this impact likely to be felt the most? The most it will be felt among those people who predominantly use cash for their transactions, because they are the ones who are going to get now squeezed. Correct? So if that is the case, then who are these people? So everybody said informal sector, informal sector. Yes, informal sector I think is generating black money in India, and it is also using black money in India. Informal sector is the sector that is at once being used to generate black money and also to use black money. So we said that let us take a look at agriculture and what impact that this move has had on agriculture, and also the small and medium enterprises, because both of these are largely cash-based economies. Agriculture is predominantly cash-based, and as is the small and medium enterprise, which is also predominantly cash-based, because they pay their salaries in cash, they also buy their raw materials and inputs, other inputs in cash, and when they sell their finished products, they sell it for cash. So SMEs, and so we looked at that. So we conducted a survey in 9 states of India and some 48 districts. And so we had a framework for studying the effect of demonetization. This is a group work in IDF, this is not my own work. And so we used several secondary data sources and also some rapid primary survey, just to understand what's going on immediately. So you can see that our data points are in weeks. So it was a quick survey done to look at the immediate short-term impact of what went wrong. So the solid line indicates the currency in circulation. So you can see that on the November 9th, at the peak was 15,262 lakh crores, right? And this fell to 9,100 within 2 weeks, and then it kind of stabilized and it went on to 7,829 thousand crores by 23rd of December 16. Demand deposits have not shown much change at all. They continued pretty much during the, in fact there is a slight increase and then it leveled off. So this was the cash position. So short term what happens is immediate contraction of money happens. The cash in circulation is immediately contracted. So any transaction that is cash sensitive, basically the transactions demand for money, M1 that we talk about, which is more a function of how much income you make rather than a function of interest rates. And in this case, that part of it gets contracted. And what is the link with agriculture? Well, agriculture produces both perishable and non-perishable goods. Now, if you look at the perishable goods, it might lead to lower prices, but no fall in supply, because supply is already predetermined. They have already sown their, their tomatoes and cabbages and their rice and wheat and so on. So it was only the output that was coming into the market. But if there is a cash squeeze, it will be shown as a reduction in prices because the demand is getting cut. In the case of non-perishable goods, maybe lower prices, but they can also manage a little bit with inventory control, right? So they may not put out all their produce into the market for supply, so it may actually lead to fall in supply as well. And the assumption is that production decisions are taken before and storage cost is manageable for them. In the long term, we will have to see some structural changes in the economy. How, when these people get connected to the formal monetary sector, they are going to be now subjected to the Reserve Bank of India purview, right? Earlier, by staying out of the formal monetary sector, these people, this informal sector was immune to monetary policy. Any changes in the interest rate that was put out through the Reserve Bank of India did not have much of an impact on this informal sector because they had their own sources of money supply or credit. They went to local money lenders. Their informal monetary sector was completely disconnected or largely disconnected from the formal monetary sector. But this kind of a sudden, link with the rest of the economy will lead to some structural changes, hopefully positive. And it may get fully remonetized, in which case there is no effect. That is, the money entirely came back into the banking system. I had it in cash and it is my legitimate money. I put it in the bank and I got the credit and now I can withdraw it and I can spend it. I have not suffered. Of course, the pain and suffering of having to stand in the line still remains. But other than that, I have access to my money. I have not lost my money. So I have got fully remonetized. And they will adjust to less cash transactions and there will be no effect because already this Paytm, all of that is coming to play, and then spending money is not very hard. I mean, you don't need to have cash. Even the local vegetable vendor has that what was that? Paytm, the picture, and then you show it, and cab drivers, auto rickshaw drivers, everybody adjusted very fast. So, what data sources did we use? We used wholesale retail price data and select mandis and all that. This is wholesale price at the mandi level that we used. So the question was, did the agricultural prices fall, right? And so the answer, some mixed answers. In fact, you may find our findings somewhat surprising. If you look at the supply, the blue line is referring to what happened in 2015. And the red line refers to what happened in 2016. Data is available, right? So we can see that pretty much if you look at the mandi and how much of tomatoes arrived in the market, there is not much of a variation between the 2 years in terms of output. And even in Hyderabad, this is found to be the case. So this is the day when demonetization happened, and after that you can see that the arrivals are going on more or less in tandem. But what happened to the wholesale prices? On the 9th of November, the wholesale price in Delhi for tomato was around 3,000 rupees per 100 kilograms, and then it shows a reduction. But this was in 2015. In 2016, again we see sort of a fall, and then there is a steadiness. Now there are a couple of, we should also remember that this year agriculture had a good year in terms of rains. Right, so whereas 2015 was declared to be a drought year, therefore it was a bad year for agriculture. So we have to factor that in, and the other thing that we need to factor in is what this diagram shows. This is the so-called Diwali effect, when all the prices change. Yes. So this year it was in October. Last year it was in November. So that also contributed, right? So around 22nd October was when the Diwali is a big national festival. If you are not familiar with it, and people, it's like your Christmas. So in retail data, if you look at the US retail data, at least they say that 80% of total retail sales happens around 2 weeks of Christmas. Around the rest of the year, 20% of retail sales happen. So it's something like that. It has a similar impact here. And you find that after Diwali, the prices had anyway started moving down. And the downward trend continued even after the demonetization. So there was no noticeable shock in the price series, at least, right? And again, comparing it with with 2015, we find that once again in 2015, 9th this November was the this is the demonetization time, and then the prices fell because this is the Diwali effect playing out in 2015. Now, around this time there was Diwali and the prices fell, and then they stabilized, went up and so on. But if you look at 2016, once again there is a small fall. I think this one shows this fall, 9th October to 9th November, and then the prices have more or less remained the same. So if we were to put out a hypothesis that people were cash constrained and therefore they could not buy tomatoes, and demand fell and therefore prices should fall, that is not borne out by the evidence that we have. There was not much of a noticeable impact. Similarly with rice, again, there is not much of a noticeable impact. And this is as far as, we have done this for tomato and 22 other agricultural products. I just showed you tomato as a sample. In all the 22 other agricultural products, we found a similar impact. Now we wanted to measure the supply side impacts also. Like for example, what Rabi sowing was happening. In fact, in October, November, Rabi sowing was still going on. So what sort of an impact did it have on the sowing decisions of the farmers, right? So current production decisions. Did they continue to anticipate a reduced demand, or did they anticipate any reduced demand? Were they finding it difficult to finance production because they have to finance it with cash? They are not banked and they don't have bank accounts, and the people who work for them in the paddy fields did not have bank accounts and so on. So they are unable to finance, and therefore this could lead to reduced input demand, and in particular it could lower employment, which would then have a bigger impact on GDP, etc. So that is the complete change. So mixed response is what we found. If you look at area under cultivation, Rabi cultivation, it actually increased in 26% of the people we surveyed in the nine states said that they have increased their Rabi sowing. And this could be because, like I said, it's a good agricultural year. There was good rainfall, and that makes a lot of difference. Remained the same 28%, these two together 54%, decreased is 46%. So if you look at use of fertilizer, for example, once again, increased and remained the same, it add up to about 65% of the responses, and 35% of the people said that they have decreased their purchase of fertilizers. Seed use, very similar finding. Use of labor in agriculture, once again, very similar findings. So we are not able to conclude much from this data, but what we do see is that drastically nothing seems to have changed. There was no big change. Some effects have happened, and we are of course following this through with our data collection, and eventually a final paper will come. What I am presenting to you is some kind of a working paper. And then we moved on to looking at the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, which are again very cash based in their transactions, both in the product market and in the factor markets. They operate with cash. They sell for cash and they hire labor for cash. And they make payment, and hence they can anticipate lower sales if this was a constraint, if cash was a constraint. And reduce their input demand. They may hire less people, it will have impact on growth. So this reduction in growth, this growth pairing that is happening is assuming that people are going to lose jobs, or when growth pairing happens, people lose jobs, right? So either way, that is the hypothesis there, and it will certainly lead to lower employment. And we looked at Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and a few other, Gujarat, etc., but we have not reported the results here because they are more or less the same. Production activity has fallen when we, so the data was collected from the SME organizations, associations. So when we spoke to them in 8 districts in Telangana, yes, production activity has fallen, was around 61%, same 17, no 22. And again in Andhra Pradesh, 94% said yes, production activity has fallen, and it remained the same as 6.3. Uttar Pradesh, 87%. So here we are getting a slightly different result compared to agriculture. And the wages paid to labor have increased, yes is 30%, same 30 and no 39. And so Uttar Pradesh, yes is 87.5, same is 12.5. There is a variation among the states in the way they have adjusted, but in any case you can see that labor employed this quarter has fallen. Many of them, a majority have said that yes, employment has gone down. And employees have been fixed in the last, fired in the last 2 months. Did you fire employees? Some said not many in Telangana, some 50% said some employees were fired. So definitely there was a shrinking in the employment figures. So did this lead to people relying more on Manrega kind of government schemes? Because when people lose jobs, they have to rely on something else for their livelihoods. And Manrega is the one that provides that last resort sort of livelihood opportunity. And did they migrate? If they lost jobs in the cities or towns, did they migrate back to their villages? This was the other set of questions that we asked. And the people said that if people living in the Basti is basically like a slum, right? So people living in the Basti lost employment in the last 2 months. Telangana, not many, 55. Andhra Pradesh, not many, 53%. Uttar Pradesh, some. And some people said a lot. That is 71% in Uttar Pradesh said a lot of people have living in the Basti have lost. 2 minutes? Okay. So this trend continues. And so, like I said, in SME, we found that there was a contraction in so to conclude, we did not see any discernible impact of demonetization on agricultural prices or quantity, and production activity in SMEs is affected. And to the reason why SMEs are important is since the financial crisis of 2009-10, the growth that India has had has come largely from SME production. The large-scale corporations have increased their growth not by employment but by going in for productivity enhancing technologies and going in for material replacing technologies and so on. It is only the SMEs that have really contributed to the growth of employment in India. So that in that sense it is particularly concerning. Similar impact should result for any squeeze on cash. And that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. This is quite interesting because so far we've only been using theories or talking about this issue from what we have seen in the news, but of course it's interesting to look at what the primary service have to say. And as you rightly pointed out, this is interesting from the perspective that we now know how monetary policy can also become important when trying to understand the informal sector, how it can actually play a role in that context. But as you also pointed out, there was no perceptible change in the agricultural sector. It was mostly changes in the production in the SMEs, which have of late been contributing so much to the Indian GDP. So given these interesting findings, it's quite nice to know about the current scenario because it's just been a few months, but this is the best that we can actually hope for and look for analyzing. I would like to open the floor for further discussions and questions. So in case anyone has any question, feel free to ask. But yes.
It's a question for you. When you talked about the jobs, said, have you fired anybody? But is it possible that they didn't fire but labor left anyway because they didn't get paid?
That's also possible.
So, but that second part is not captured in
Yeah, that we try to capture through this migration data. So that is still ongoing.
Because I will read a lot of articles and you say we want to pay, we can't pay, but people are leaving.
People are leaving.
So,
but in Uttar Pradesh, so when you look at the Manrega results,
that's the other
so
thing.
that is the other thing, right? So when we ask them, so has there been additional demand for Manrega jobs? In Uttar Pradesh, 100% said no. That is because in Uttar Pradesh, in every other state, Manrega was paid through the bank account. It is only in Uttar Pradesh that Manrega payment is also done through cash. So they got squeezed. And in Gujarat, they didn't give a clear answer because around the time we were collecting data, there was elections happening. So we didn't.
Plus, you keep people out migrate.
Yes.
You don't migrate into.
Dr. Shankar,
yes.
Question, as far as this whole concept of generation of black money goes, and we are seeing that the main beacons of so-called black money or cash economy is SMEs and agricultural sector, and so they are generating it. They are also the one who have it. And if the so-called objective of demonetization is to curb black money, that's not really going to happen. Do we even want that to happen? because if such a large sector of the economy
It
is
would be,
cash based.
see, it would be good for the informal sector to get connected to the formal sector for various reasons. Because through the formal sector, they have access to various good, welfare schemes. They can borrow at, formal market rates. So if they continue to rely on informal sector, there's a problem with credit
High
and
extortionate
yeah.
rates
So
and
those
all
kinds
that.
of issues are there. So I think it's a good idea for this move towards linking them to the formal sector, and also a move towards going cashless. For example, there is one impact of going cashless which is of interest to all of us. We all know at the macroeconomic level, we all know how small amounts of taxes Indians are paying to the exchequer. Now we know that India is a country where people are rich and the governments are poor. So now, how do you get over this problem? As long as you have this so-called informal sector, the so-called agricultural sector that can be cash-based, that need not pay taxes because everything, all transactions are cash-based, this situation will continue to exist. If you go towards a cashless economy, the tax collections for the government can also go up because now there is an electronic trade. Every time you buy something, there is an electronic trade. And that can be used to trace you, who bought how much gold, who bought which car, etc. So I think in the long run, like I said, I mean again, if you were to quote Keynes, the Keynes of course said in the long run we are all dead. But I think not even that much in the long run. I think in 1 or 2 years it might actually have some positive.
This figure of 2 to 3% that we talk about, that's the only percentage of the Indian population paying taxes. We have to realize that people earning up to 2.5 lakhs per annum are anyways tax exempt. So they cannot be called as non-compliant.
That is true. That's a very good point.
And so let's get our numbers out and see, out of the entire population, first of all, how many people are exempted from tax under the current regime in the country.
I'll tell you a simple calculation that I myself had made. I looked at the standard deduction, right? So standard deduction about 15 years ago for income tax purposes was around 50,000 rupees. Even if your inflation indexed the standard deduction, today the standard deduction should not be more than 1.2 lakhs. And the standard deduction today is 3 lakhs. So the income redistribution has been largely, in that direction. So that's
while that is true,
yeah.
There are other distortions in the tax system.
Of course.
All of us who teach here in Jindal pay the same rate of income tax as the British Empire. Now there is a gross injustice in something like that. So there are problems of it. It is not to do with the lower end because the benefits that they get are in very small numbers. There is a problem with it. But on the other hand, about the informal sector, I have some questions.
Yeah.
Because the agricultural sector contributes 15% of GDP.
Yeah.
Totally. So the transactions, and even if you catch all of it, the impact on the overall GDP may not be that big. And I'm here not going into all the problems that exist with the digital payment gateways and power failures and all the rest of it. The point is that this question of black money is, I think, overblown to a large extent. There is one kind of black money, which is that I go and I eat in a restaurant and don't take a receipt. That's black. That's a black transaction according to the definitions. Now, that will change shortly with GST coming in because the system is very different. But it still catches the transactions and the indirect taxes on the transactions. The direct tax side is not there. So long as you've got high-priced lawyers who take suitcases, then I don't think nothing can be done about it.
True, that is true. Absolutely.
And why are they printing 2,000 rupee notes? Still double the value in the
the reason why, your point is extremely important, because if you look at the tax structure, our reliance is largely on the indirect taxes. And the reason for that is because we are unable to catch these briefcase toting lawyers, as you call them. So we say we need money to spend for public expenditure. So at least let's have indirect tax, which are highly distortionary, which are actually regressive. They are proven to be regressive. Study after study has shown that in the indirect tax system is regressive and the poor people are paying much more taxes than the rich people. All of this is true. But we still rely on them because we are unable to catch the direct taxes.
Also, agricultural income is tax exempt, it's only indirectly taxed. So this entire sector, which is earning its income through the agricultural sector, and however large part that is of our economy, agricultural income today is directly tax exempt.
True.
So that, I mean, so I don't get it. So do you feel for all the research that you've done that the demonetization has in any way curbed generation of black money?
No.
Or what is even black money? And even for me, I would like to recoin demonetization as saying exchanging old for new steel. The government hasn't said that every 500 and 1000 rupee note which is out there has lost legal value. All it has said is that only that money of yours which you can't account for, which doesn't show up in your book of accounts, which doesn't show up as cash in hand, which you can't explain to the tax authorities, only that has lost legal value.
Actually, to get right down technical about it, the black money generated is not even that. It's the tax that is evaded that is in principle considered to be black money, not the quantum.
Unaccounted for. What you don't account for, you don't pay tax.
But you're talking about a lot of things. So if you look at the agricultural income, yes, it is tax free. And where does this briefcase go? How do they launder their money? There are various ways of laundering money. They invent, they have some land somewhere, and then in 2 acres of land, they will make 15 crores of income through selling kiwi fruit, which doesn't even grow in India, right? So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that is going on. This is what I meant when I said that the informal sector is generating also to a large extent this kind of cash, and this is totally unaccounted because it doesn't come into the bracket at all.
Question comes to
my question is to Mr. Tushar. So you spoke about the CRR, SLR and the other instruments that RBI uses it in forming its monetary policy. So I would like you to give us some light on how CRR, SLR and the monetary policy of RBI has affected inflation and what impact did demonetization have on it. And the recent RBI bi-monthly journal is also out. So what are your takes on it and how the banking industry as a whole will be affected by it?
If you go by the basic monetary policy equation, which Sir explained, MB is equal to PT or PY, increase in money supply leads to higher inflation. But I think the basic assumption there is that if the money is coming back into the banking sector and if credit growth remains low, that actual money should not lead to inflation, right? That credit growth, the real economy needs to pick up for that inflation to come back into the system. So the general discussions which have been happening is that the liquidity problem is that it would lead to inflation, which is not actually much big of a concern. The bigger concern is that it would lead to distortions in the capital markets. So for example, you must have heard that the banking sector is currently dealing with large amount of NPAs in the system. The problem of non-performing assets is quite high. Now, if that problem is not settled in and that problem is not solved, while at the same time the banking sector is going and investing in some other risky assets, it's kind of creating a bubble, right? So, for example, any company with good credit rating can go into a bond market and borrow money from the banks by issuing CPs, commercial papers. Now, the yield for these CPs have declined substantially compared to what it was before the demonetization. They are able to raise money at much lower interest rates. Whether these interest rates they make sense or not, that is the main worry which is to be tackled. And this is the main worry in my view that has to be tackled as far as the liquidity management is concerned. Because going into inflation and other issues, it won't really happen unless the real economy picks up. The problem at hand is tackling the that bubble which is into a creation, which is in the which is in the making. And I think this is the way which I think if you look at the basic how excess money was handled before demonetization, banking sector, if suppose they had 100 rupees excess of money, they used to go to the RBI, park their money with the RBI, they used to get interest rate of around 6%. So you pay 4% to a depositor, you get around 5 to 6% from the RBI, your margins are okay. But now what is happening is, if you go to the RBI and park your excess money, every time you park your excess money, you get collateral, that is the government securities. Since government is not borrowing much, as I said, the good government is one which doesn't really borrow much. There is lack of collateral in the system. There are not enough securities. So this reverse repo transaction is not, which is, there are doubts that it will be able to happen, and the lack of securities is something which is really curtailing it. And so government wants to absorb money, RBI wants to absorb that excess money, but without that collateral, it becomes a difficult task. So therefore, there's a need to introduce new instruments, and I think, as I said earlier, SDF is one instrument which is being considered. Hike in CRR is also one instrument which can be considered. But then hike in CRR is something which is not, interest earning for the bank, so it becomes a dent on their earnings. So there are various instruments which are, I think, RBI is discussing with the finance ministry, and I think something should be launched quite soon.
So the service strategy you're working on.
Not being with the
No, but
You can't get it anywhere, right? So start with it.
regardless of what happens, banks will always find a way of making money. It is also, it's just that you also make the mistake of lending it to.
Not so worthy.
Yes.
Wrong people.
Yeah. No, but this trust issue that was raised by Sandhu, I read it differently. I look at it from a purely common sense perspective. So if you have an economy where 86% of total currency is held as cash, I would say that the trust in the currency is phenomenally high in that country. Because otherwise, why would people want to hold on to cash?
That's not it. 80% of the high denomination of
Exactly. Exactly. So there was 80% of the high denomination notes, which was a huge amount of money, was held in cash. So that does not show that the Indians did not have faith. So prior to the demonetization, I think Indians' faith in their currency was a little too much, yes. And subsequent to demonetization, we don't know because we don't have data, right? But one data I want to discuss with you, sir. The rupee has appreciated. In the last 3 months, the dollar has depreciated against the rupee, the pound sterling has depreciated, of course that was because of Brexit, and the euro has depreciated against the rupee, and the rupee has been climbing steadily. The dollar has gone down from 69 rupees to 65 today. The euro has gone down from 75 to around 70. So it looks like even the foreigners are having tremendous trust in the Indian rupee.
Dr. Shanti, maybe Trump has something to do with the dollar depreciating against the rupee.
Why? Why should no? Because after Trump became the president of the United States, there has been a lot of capital inflows into the United States. He is not pushing money.
Actually has a point.
He is not pushing money away from the US into India. He is actually attracting, but India is also attracting.
Demand for dollar is going down.
She's actually having a point here. So we do quite a detailed analysis on the currency movements. And I think it is more to do with the global factors rather than the domestic factor. So when Trump was elected as president, there was something called as Trump trade, which really picked up into the market.
But I agree that all the global developments are fine. I also follow some of them. I don't deny that. But the thing is, if you put something like trust on the table, all these global factors will vanish. If the moment trust becomes an issue, why would people invest when there is no trust? Regardless of what the expected returns are. If there is no trust, people don't invest. That's it.
You take attention back to the other moral hazard. That you could pay your taxes using that useless paper. I mean, there seems to be something wrong in that.
Yes, I mean, in fact, between the time of announcing this November 9th thing and December 31st, Mr. Modi made so many changes in his policy announcement. Today you can withdraw 2,000, no, tomorrow you can withdraw only 1,000, and then no, you can withdraw 10,000, no, you have to give a check, no, this, no, that. So many things.
The tax amnesty.
And the tax amnesty, this property tax, you can buy railway tickets. Many people seem to have bought railway tickets and cancelled them and got the money. You can buy railway tickets, and then you can pay for
There's
hospital.
something here that we can understand.
So this is the way it came out. It was
who benefited from this, and there are a lot of issues.
yeah.
Railway tickets were cash only, is that correct? Up until...
No, the delegalized notes could you use to buy railway tickets.
Right.
They could be used to pay your property taxes. So there's something here. Is it money or is it not money? Is there something called quasi money? I'm not really sure what is
Quasi money is your credit card.
No, but this is delegalized notes. And there are a lot of people who put it in the Tirupati Hundi.
Right.
Whether they got punya, I don't know.
But Tirupati Hundi has always...
They could change it.
Deal maker.
So it's a very complicated thing where it was not money for many purposes.
That's true.
But there are some select purposes. How were those things chosen? There are a lot of issues.
That could be a political dimension.
No, there is a political dimension.
Which is, that unfortunately we are straitjacketed with our own profession. But there are political, social, historical things like angles to this.
You can do the positive spin by saying that municipalities which are languishing for money suddenly got flush with fund, not flush, but got liquidity,
right,
which they can use for, sanitation or whatever.
Yeah, I do believe, however, to comment on what you just mentioned, in India was always, I always saw the country which put in a lot of trust in things which are not just money. The demand for gold in India or for jewelry, very few countries now would actually hold an amount of
that's a
precious
cultural
metals
and social
these
thing.
days.
It doesn't people in India don't look at gold as an asset class. They look at it as consumption item. They look at it as something that will get them prestige. So it's a sociological factor and cultural factor.
But is it true that many people in India have gold in safe?
Yes.
Or even alternative?
Yes. Yeah, of course.
Yes. So gold is not an investment class.
But if you hold it in safe, how can it be social status? Like when it's a
So
car.
there is a wedding, what
When
do
there
you
is a
do?
wedding, there's that gold.
And what do the women wear during a wedding? What do you
I think that the kids you put it in safe like for safekeeping.
For safekeeping, yes.
I also it's also I'm totally so you leave it in the safe.
If it's stolen, you don't report it.
If it is stolen, they don't report it because it was bought anyway with black money.
Normally there's also protection for any kind of eventualities in future. Gold is a solid backup in Indian context,
Right.
but it has got more socio-cultural meaning. Your social status is being reflected by the quantity of gold that you hold. So you normally don't look at an ETF or a gold fund to compare that with the stock market returns. Basically put it at how much more gold you have got.
The gold bonds that the Reserve Bank has been trying to push has been a massive failure. Who would buy?
I've seen minister daughters getting married where the body weight is 60 kilo and they are wearing 50 kilo of gold.
Yeah.
And they had depression because you are wearing so much of gold. So they don't demonetisation there this time. So gold has a different meaning for us because English people took away so much of gold from India. We are very possessive about
What is that?
what gold is left. Yes. And we always like to have more gold for us. You should check out how much you are taking so that in fact.
Not just the English, we also had Mughal invaders, and there is a huge history of people coming into India and taking away gold.
We talked about liquidity, and then we moved on to an interesting primary survey which has looked at the total sector, and then we ended up discussing about some other interesting topics such as consumer-driven, credit-driven growth, and so on. So it was overall a very interesting talk, and I'm sure everyone has gained a lot of knowledge out of it. So thanks once again for coming for this particular talk. Especially, I would like to thank our panelists today, as well as the dean and other faculty members and the students who turned up for this event. So that's it that we have for this session today. We will again be meeting for the next session tomorrow morning at 9:30. Alright, thank you once again.
All the best with the rest of the conference. Thank you.